Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of Suffolk Police and Crime Panel. I am Councillor Sarah Mansel, Chair of the panel. This meeting is being broadcast live and is available to watch on the Council's YouTube channel whilst we are in public session. A recording of the meeting will also be available online after the meeting. Members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded, provided due courtesy and respect are shown to others in attendance in line with the Council's published guidance. Can I remind you to speak clearly into the microphones and avoid placing things such as papers or IT equipment in front of the microphone, as this will affect the sound quality. Please turn your mobile phones and laptops onto silent if you have not already done so. We are not expecting a fire drill. In the event of an alarm sounding, please leave the room by following the fire exit signs. Fire evacuation instructions can also be found on page 4 of the agenda. Before the first agenda item, I would like to welcome Councillor Joe Mason to his first meeting of the panel. Welcome, Joe, and we look forward to working with you. Agenda item 1 is public question session. No questions have been received from members of the public. Item number 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. So we have received apologies from Councillor Elisabeth Malvisi, and I think everyone else is here, so well done. Item number 3, declarations of interest and dispensations. There have been no declarations received in advance of the meeting. If you wish to declare an interest now, please raise your hand. Thank you. Item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting. If any member wishes to comment on the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of October 2025, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, I will take it that the panel is content to approve the minutes of the meeting as a correct record. So nobody is raising their hand. I will confirm that we are approving them because we've had no objections. And then we move on to our main item for discussion today, which is item number 5, the PCC's proposed precept for 2026-27. At agenda item 5, the panel is asked to consider and either support or veto the PCC's proposals for the policing precept for 2026-27. I would draw the panel's attention to the areas of focus and key lines of inquiry which are set out on pages 17 and 18 of the agenda pack. Members should note that in order to be able to vote at the end of this item, they must have been present in the meeting room for the whole of the consideration of this item. I would now like to invite the PCC to introduce his proposals for the policing precept for 2026-27. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody, on a lovely day. There we are. So, the background for the proposal today, as you will have seen from your papers, I'm recommending option 2, which is for a 5.1% increase, taking the £15 for the increase which is based on a Band D property. Option 1, just to fill in some of the detail, would result in a £1.4 million deficit, so we would therefore have to make further savings on top of the £2.8 million of savings that we already have programmed. If we go for option 2, then the budget will rise to around £205 million, as no doubt you will all have seen in your papers. I want to do a little bit more about the general situation at the moment, and I would respectfully ask you to remember that Suffolk continues to have a very good track record on recorded crime. We are the third lowest or have the third lowest recorded crime rate in the country according to the latest set of statistics from the ONS, Office for National Statistics, and we've now been in that favourable position for 18 months. And it is very important when we're looking at economic development, general well-being, that we maintain that position. This is not about saying that there isn't room for improvement. Of course there is in any organisation. You'll all know that from the work that you all do. And we do need to be better, developing projects, sticking to budgets, timeliness of delivery and so on. But nevertheless, please remember that third lowest level of recorded crime rate per resident is really, really important. So that's a very good result from all involved. And I think the other thing that I want to point out is that you will have heard some constabularies are in pretty difficult financial positions. We do not have a huge level of debt. We have some. That was taken on for the purchase of our share of Landmark House before I was elected, £5 million. But compared with others, we are in a good position, but we jolly well need to maintain that. And the key responsibility for a police and crime commissioner is to make sure we have an efficient and effective force and that the finances are in a suitable state to go forward. I think the other point I would make here is, whilst we are in a good position financially, clearly we can't be profligate. It's taxpayers' money, but we need to look at the long term. And this is where things become rather difficult. The publication of the recent white paper and the idea of having mega forces fills me with dread. I don't have a problem with looking at doing certain things nationally at all. That does make sense. But to lose that local contact with your police force, I don't think that's what residents and businesses want here at all, and I don't agree with it. Potentially putting things together with Norfolk, I can understand that, but that in itself, I would respectfully say, is not that easy. You have different levels of finance, you have different cultures, you have different levels of council tax, and all of this would have to be worked through very, very carefully. And I know we're not here to debate that specifically today, but it is about that longer term resilience financially that we've got. And I would also say that some of the national initiatives in various things, bigger is not always better. Look at the Foundation Trust for Mental Health. There is no doubt a degree of postcode lottery. If you look at the National Health Service, I am and always have been quite critical of the way the National Police Air Service was set up. We get a pretty poor deal, in my view, in Suffolk. It's even worse for Norfolk. And the danger is going forward that we would end up, if we have a mega force going down to 10, 12, 13 forces, you're currently 43, we would end up as a bit part player dominated by larger urban areas. And I don't think that's what people want at all. Bearing in mind the performance we've got at the moment, I see no reason for change unless you're going to be absolutely sure it's going to be better than the status quo. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. So there's that on side. The other thing, or various things I'd like you to remember, I've got a little list here. When the government has said that they're giving an extra £795 million to policing, like the previous government, there's a sleight of hand here. That only depends on police and crime commissioners maximising the precept increase. 49% of our funding comes from the precept in Suffolk, and I would like you to remember that. It's no good governments and the Home Office saying we're giving you all this extra money. Well, they haven't done any of the sort. And there are a few more issues here as well. If you look at the Employers' National Insurance increase that came in for this financial year, the prediction for next year, we're already short of about £250,000, £275,000, which has to come from our own resources or the council taxpayer. Next year, because they don't pay NIC on overtime, which we do rely on, potentially there's a gap there of £300,000. And one little statistic, if you have an extra £1 on your council tax in Suffolk, that raises about £270,000 a year. So if you can just remember that, okay? The council tax reduction scheme, which districts and boroughs are quite entitled to deliver, we have no say in that. The cost for us potentially next year will go up from about £270,000 to £300,000. We have no say in that whatsoever, and I'm not saying it's wrong for districts to do it, but what it is, in my view, is wrong. If you do that with districts and boroughs, we have a financial penalty, so I would ask you to consider that, okay? We have to make up that gap somewhere. Bearing in mind, 80% of our costs are to do with staff costs, salaries, NIC, pension contributions, which I think now they're quite high. We're not being financed fully for any pay awards. Again, I have no control over that. None of us do here. And we have to fill that gap in. We're budgeting, I think we're quite sensible on that, 3.5%. But if we don't have that increase in the council tax, it's going to result in reductions elsewhere. I was somewhat dismayed for the neighbourhood policing guarantee. We have been told you've got to employ an extra 16 officers for the coming financial year. The government says it's providing the money. It is not. We are being provided, I think it was £447,000, which is barely half the cost of employing an extra 16 officers. Now, we want to employ these people, don't get me wrong, and we're very grateful for what we have, but if we're told we've got to have that, then what choice have you got? Bear in mind, at the moment, we have a penalty. If our head count falls below 1,425, and that's more officers than we've ever had, we get clobbered with a penalty of 80,000 quid for each officer we don't keep. All right? So where do you put the economies and so on? And that's one of the reasons, another reason why we need to deal with that. The ongoing delays in the court system is costing, on estimate, because we have to keep in touch with those who are being charged, witnesses, defendants and so on, could be rising up to, it's well over £200,000 a year at the moment. We have to employ extra people, and I think with the ongoing backlog it could well rise up, considerably more than that, perhaps up to £300,000. Each 1% increase in pay, and I'm putting staff and police officers together, costs us £1.5 million per year. So please look at those figures and remember that. Successive governments, going back to the coalition, the blue ones, the current one, are refusing to revise the funding formula. And as I said, I think at every one of the 13 presentations I've made in this role, we are pretty disadvantaged here, but we have to maintain that good policing standard. As I say, there's always room for improvement, but I do think that's important to remember that. We're also being told by the Home Office, the long-term commitment, etc., we're going to have to do more from our own resources. Well, that's fine. That would be far better, of course, if the funding formula was more equitable. I'm not looking for absolute parity. But I'd also remind you that the collaboration we do with Norfolk, next year we'll be saving between both constabularies on a recurring basis £57.6 million, of which Suffolk's share, which you'll have seen in the papers, is £27 million. Now, we're going to continue with that. That's really, really important, because without that, I dread to think where we would be. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic about this. Another point that I do want to remind everybody respectfully of, I was dismayed that our funding for victims for this current year was cut by 4.2%. This does not sit well with the proposal, which I do welcome, of having a real or greater focus on violence against women and girls, serious sexual offences, exploitation of children. Our work we do with the charities and voluntary sector and many others in this county, I think is a cornerstone of what we have to deliver. I honestly cannot say, everybody, that it is right that the charitable and voluntary sector takes a hammering for reduced funding. If you look at our RIDVA contract, which I think is the only one in the country, I do stand to be correct on this, we did a contract there for 3 years with the option to extend it for 2, so 5 years. It has greatly expanded over the last number of years. When I started 13 years ago, we had one IDVA, Independent Domestic Violence Advisor, for the whole county. We've now got 16. The work they do for looking after victims of domestic violence and abuse, I think, is second to none. And as I think I said last year, we have expanded that work, including supporting ethnic minorities, different cultures, those with mental health afflictions, same-sex couples, young people, and so on. And I really can't sit here in all honesty and say if we don't have that extra money, we're going to start reducing the service to them. That's not the way we should be doing things in Suffolk. So I would urge you to think about that. As I say, we have that big savings programme that's really, really important. So we are going to do what we can to support them. But it is a really difficult position. I think some of the funding is going to be recouped for next year on victims, not the whole lot, but bear in mind 2 years on, there is still a gap, and of course demand is rising. I was at Brave Futures the other day doing some pieces for the It's Not OK, sexual abuse of children, and actually demand is increasing rapidly. I was with Illuma over in Brandon the other day, and their demand is so great there's now a 2-year waiting list for people, victims of domestic abuse and violence and they're doing what they can, but we'll continue to support them. So the removal of the hotspot policing grant is another issue that came in, I think 2 days ago. That is £1 million, which has now been taken away because you should now be doing that automatically. Well, that was really welcome for us. That helped pay for a lot of extra overtime. So we need to continue that work. We need to continue with things like Clear Whole Bill, which we know is happening in pilot originally up in Lowestoft, but Felixstowe, Newmarket, and of course in Ipswich. These are really, really important initiatives, a multi-agency approach, which really, really helps. If you've got any specific financial questions over and above what I've said, then I'm sure Colette will answer those. I'm going to hand over to Sandra in a minute. I'm sure you're all waiting to hear what the results of our online survey were. So I'll get Sandra to talk about that. But the last comment I make is on option 2. By making sure we don't have a deficit going forward, and obviously we can't plan, you can't put in a budget in deficit, the money that we will have there will enable further investment in technology. You'll find that in the papers there. And by increasing productivity, and we'll certainly give you an update later on in the financial year, subject to approval, of course, it will enable us to improve visibility in the towns and our market towns. That's really important. And a focus on, or more focus on rural crime. That's really important. Technology, it's not a panacea for everything, but if we can improve productivity, robotics, data handling, these sorts of things, some use of AI, but of course we've got to be very careful, bearing in mind what happened in the West Midlands with AI. My own view, and I'm not an expert, using it for information you already have to make better use of it is absolutely fine. I can see huge advantages of that, but we need to be making that investment. We're not getting any capital allowance from the government whatsoever, so we have to do it from our own resources. So the point about option 2, it will enable the constabulary to progress. Yes, there are more efficiencies to be made. Yes, we can do better. I absolutely get that. Same for any organisation. But I really would urge you to support the case for option 2, because that will enable us certainly to maintain our position on crime data and keeping Suffolk safe. We are privileged to live in one of the safest counties in the country. We need to maintain that. If we want to get the economy motoring, keeping crime levels down is a key factor of that, as I've always said. So there we are. I'm just going to hand over to Sandra on the survey. And over to you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give you the highlights, and then if you want any more specific information, you can obviously ask questions afterwards. We set the survey just into the new year, it was 7th of January, and we finished it yesterday, 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, so this really is hot off the press. I did give Sarah, Chair, the results that we picked up this morning. Oh, that's most unusual. I shall speak a bit louder. We had 1,206 responses to the survey, and 57 of those that responded to the question said they would be prepared to pay the extra. 57% supported and 43% said no. The question they were asked was, written from Tim, do you agree with my proposal to increase the policing element of the council tax for this coming financial year by 5.2%? And we gave them an example of that would be 22 pence a week for a Band B property and 29 pence for a Band D property. And 57.1 said yes, they would support that proposal, and 42.9 said that they would not. We had, if you want a little bit of the background of where the responses came from, we had the best support from East Suffolk, which was 35%. And the lowest response was from Ipswich, that was 10%. I can share all this detail with you, obviously, afterwards. The majority of people that filled in the survey lived in a Band D property, that was 30%, but we had representatives from each of the bands, but obviously, as always, people are giving me...
Hang on a minute, Sandra. Councillor Beer is... Yeah, can we just let her finish?
Yep, I'll carry on. As always, people had the option not to say which band they lived in, they lived in. And the age group, we had a mix between, well, it went from 18 to 80 plus, but the majority were in the 61 to 80 band. We had 60% of the respondents were male, and just under 40% were female. And I have got details of the ethnicity, and there were 88% ticked the British box, but we had representation from Irish, white, Caribbean, Asian, multi-ethnic backgrounds, Chinese, other Asian, African, and Black African Caribbean. But the percentages of those were much lower, as we would have expected.
Thank you.
Could I just add another point there? So we do look at all the comments, but obviously as the survey only closed yesterday, one point I failed to mention, so apologies for that. I absolutely do get that people are in difficult positions financially, and I'm not just saying that. There were several comments in there that I think, these are only the initial ones, well, my salary hasn't gone up, my wages haven't gone up by 5%. I absolutely get that. And that's a really difficult decision to make this, but I do have to say, keeping crime levels down, getting that balance right is really important. And of course, the welfare system, those on pension credit and other things, should help, it does say, with paying for council tax. So on balance, I have to look at all of that, and I say we all, every one of us here, including Rachel, we look at that, and it isn't something you like to do, but I do have to say, I think we are united. That issue about crime, if we want to get inward investment, economic growth, high levels of crime don't help. And one other point, I'm sorry I forgot to say this as well, it's a real shame, the government announced, I think it was yesterday, funding for violence reduction units and so on, and county lines initiatives. We get not a penny for this, and I'm really fed up with this, because why is it they keep putting money into the big urban areas and we have to do everything from our own resources? We've got a good track record when it comes to county lines, and that's because of the multi-agency work we started, I think, 8 years ago from the Pooled Business Rates Fund from public sector leaders. Really, really important, these things. And that work has jolly well got to continue, because the damage done to societies, things like county lines, organised crime groups and so on, we should not be tolerating it. But we've got to have the resources to do that. So please bear that in mind. And it's also about the future of our youngsters. We've got to set things right for them. They've got enough problems as it is. So please remember that as well. If we don't have that option too, then there will be a downward trend on what we're able to do. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Now, I think it looked like Councillor Beer and Councillor Finch had some questions. Were they specifically on the questionnaire? Or was yours also something to do with the questionnaire, because it was whilst... Well, because that's quite fresh in our mind, let's have questions about the public consultation. So we'll have Councillor Beer, Councillor Finch and Councillor Smith. Oh no, yours isn't about that, okay. And then we'll just move on to other topics. But I think you were itching to say something there, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mine was just a point of clarification. You stated 57% were accepted it. 42.9 said no. And you pointed out the cost. Did you point out in that questionnaire that that was just one of the contributions from possibly 5 partners that would possibly ask for an increase? You told them that it was so many pence and it was going to be £15 a year, but did you tell them this was part of a package, because they have the county tax to pay, they have the district borough tax to pay, they have social care tax to pay, I've forgotten the 4th one, parish councils, yes, and then they have the police. So there's 5 elements. When I say to people when they've commented on this, and I've had quite a lot of comments on it, that that's just part of possibly 5 that may increase, and so far I think 4 of the 5 are increasing. It's much more than that. And so it's a bit misleading when you say it's only a few pence. It is on your part, but the overall picture can be considerably higher. And all I want to know was you didn't distinguish that was just part of the possible increases.
We were quite clear that this is the policing part of the precept.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that's exactly the same with the county council and the districts and boroughs. When they talk about their increase, they don't talk about the policing element, they just talk about their own part. So we were absolutely clear at every point, this is the policing part of your council tax precept. So we didn't refer to everything that everybody else gets, because to be honest, most people will have different elements. Some will have parish councils, some won't. And those percentages will be different. I think it would be unnecessary for us to get involved in that detail. We just have to be really clear that this is the policing part of that precept.
Thank you, Madam. I do accept that. I just wanted to be clear because that should be put in by all of them, and you're doing exactly what is required of you. I understand that, but thank you. It's not a true picture.
No, but interestingly, I don't believe that the county or the districts go out to consultation and ask this sort of question anyway. It's only the policing bit that you have to do it, but the council, the county council and the district borough councils don't. They don't have a questionnaire to say, do you want us to put council tax up? They don't have to. They might do it, but so just bear that in mind as well. Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just want clarification on the responses as a percentage of the total population. Because whether I've written the numbers wrong, you've had 1,200 responses, and there's 500,000 population in the county. And no, that's including youngsters, that's why I cut them down. But that's an incredibly small number. And what are we doing? The question is, what are we doing to try and increase that response? Because I must admit, within the rural area, one, they don't talk about it. Two, and I wonder whether they register the consultation anyway.
Our aim, obviously, is to get everybody to respond. Realistically, we normally get around about the 1,000 mark. It doesn't represent the population. I do appreciate that in numbers. But we do send it out to thousands. Well, even just through the councillors, if we send it to every councillor in the county, that's district, county, borough and town and parish councillors, we send it out to every single one of them via the democratic services for the councils. So if you just added them together, and these are people who are signed up to supporting the county, we would have more than 1,100. So we can't even get those numbers don't represent all the councillors that we send it to. So it is disappointing, but I do feel that we do as much as we possibly can. It goes out through the constabulary, which has a much wider network of engagement than the Office of the PCC, understandably. And it goes out through every council. It goes out through a whole host of, and Adriana has got a copy of this list, it goes out to a whole host of organisations that represent the county. It goes out to our commission services. It goes to the MPs for them to ask them specifically to share it with their contacts. So if you were to actually add those numbers up, that 1,000 does look poor, but if it is the people who choose to respond, and I do feel when you read them, some people say, we get asked this every year. We are, as the Chair says, we are the only democratic organisation within the county that asks the public their view. Nobody else has to. So we can't compare what the county council would get from a survey or what a district or borough would, because you don't do it. So there's no benchmarking for that. But compared to other OPCCs, I think we do well.
Did you want to come back, Councillor?
You put me off my stick. Are there any, I mean, I won't expect you to have the answer now, but if of those 1,200 responses, it would be useful to have, perhaps at the next meeting, any specific areas which were a surprise to us or something which actually would in the future we would be sensible to address. In other words, it's more of a qualitative rather than a quantitative type message when you get through to going through those responses. Because there's an open-ended question and they can put things in.
Yes, as you say, Chair, we do share the responses. They are really broad, and I think in most cases, even from people that say no, they are still supportive of the constabulary. They will say the constabulary do a good job, but I just don't feel that I can afford to support this. So the no's don't represent people's views on policing necessarily. So I'd like to make that point, that we do get an awful lot of people that say, if you read their comments, you would think that they'd voted yes, because it's very supportive of policing in the county and the support that they get locally. But they have other reasons for saying no, and generally financial ones. Tim might want to
Just a couple of things to add to that. And we haven't analysed it fully because, as I say, the survey only finished yesterday at 2 p.m. However, one of the areas that is there is about the communication connectivity, if you like. A lot of support for the new digital desk, new methods. But as you all know, we have got big plans for further investment in the control room with the advent of buying the other share of Landmark House. So that is certainly a theme that's there. How do you actually develop that? And if I may say so, I don't think Sandra could have done any more about communication anywhere else. We'd love to have 25,000 answers. I'd probably like to have even more. But there's another thing that we didn't mention, done various interviews on various radio stations, be it Radio Suffolk and the others, I can't remember, Genix and various ones there. One or two TV interviews, of course, and the articles in the media as well. So we have done everything possible that I can think of to try and get people to respond. And I would say this, I don't know whether everybody in this room responded or not. I'm not going to do a hands up. But the reality is, getting people with all the councils and parish councils and town councils you talk to, the data speaks for itself, doesn't it? Not everybody did respond. So just kindly reflect on that is all I would say. I'm not making many comments. Funny enough, I responded to the survey, but you'd expect me to do that, wouldn't you? So, yes, but it does give a feel. It's not an absolute accurate analysis of where we are. It's not a fundamental piece of research, but it does give a guide, and certainly if there, and I think there are going to be 3 or 4 themes there that we could look at, well, as last year, we will share them with you. Just take a little while to analyse it, but we'll certainly do that, without a doubt.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett had his hand up, and then I think Councillor Beale wants to come back.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for my slight delayed arrival. It was a slight delay on the train from Felixstowe. I have to put my hands up. I didn't reply to the survey, but...
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you're saying.
Can you bring the microphones slightly closer, I think? They're not wonderful, these microphones.
But I feel that that's okay, because my cohort of white over 61 and above is overrepresented. So that's my main concern. I actually think the number of 1,200 responses is quite good. I think that is a meaningful sample. I think the problems with the responses is the majority being 61 to 80, Sandra, you said. I mean, just recently there have been some statistics on, this is about the first time ever that the over 60s income is higher than the working age population's income. So the work over the years on the triple lock, et cetera, and wealth wrapped up in houses has really benefited people of probably most of our age group. And they're more affluent than the working age population. So what I would be looking to do on this is to try to reach younger working families, people in their 20s and 30s. I don't have all the stats, but from what you've told me there, Sandra, the majority being 61 to 80. That's actually nowadays most likely to be the most affluent people in the population. And when you're looking at increasing your council tax, those pennies and pounds might not seem much to somebody in a fairly affluent situation, but they will do to somebody who's bringing up a young family. The ethnicity is in line with Suffolk has 93% white, 80 to 88% white British was your response. That's in line. I think the other area is the gender mix. 60% male, 40% female. I would really look to try to balance that out, because we know that that's basically not in line with the overall population. And of course, women are probably more likely to be affected by a lot of the crime that we look at. Yeah, so those would be my observations, and also just say that East Suffolk Council does do a survey related to its council tax work and amounts. But those are my my main observations. Thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. That's really helpful. Yeah, I didn't realise the County Council did one because I've never seen it. So, East Suffolk. Sorry. Oh, well, I wouldn't see that one. That's fine. It's a pity that I couldn't get this information to you quicker, because obviously I'm sitting here looking at all the stats and you haven't got them. We did have 36% of the respondents were in that 25 to 50 bracket. So it wasn't, although the 61 to 80 was the highest, there's not that much, I don't think, difference between the two. And also, we have to appreciate that not everybody, a lot of people skipped this question. So of the 1,200 people that we had quite a few people, 165 skipped it. So who knows how that fits, and that's always difficult. And we have had this conversation before, that if we don't give people the opportunity to skip, then they just close it down and they don't go any further. So we have that balance of, do we give them the opportunity to skip, or do we not, and therefore the numbers would reduce. So we have to remember that there's 165 people that didn't answer the question, so who knows where they would be.
Yeah, can I just say, I absolutely understand where you're coming from, Seamus, and of course this issue about, and Peter mentioned this, policing is only part of the overall council tax. Clearly the biggest part by far is the county council, and if you put social care, whether you split it up or not, is almost beside the point, but it's a far bigger part. And all I would say, defence isn't the right word here, but bearing in mind the government says, as all governments do, we've given all this extra money, they haven't done anything of the sort. And the difficulty we've got, I can already hear the arguments, well, if you don't maximise the council tax, don't tell me you're short of money. And this is a really unhelpful, in my view, a rather juvenile way of debating it, but they all do it. And I come back to the point that Suffolk, in my view, does get discriminated against when it comes to finances, and we are in a cleft stick here. I will keep making the point, I think, on balance, and it is a balance, I absolutely get that, but put that in with the savings already programmed for 2.8 million next year. If we don't keep crime levels down and don't progress policing, I think that will be to the detriment of everybody. It's not a choice you really want to make, but it's a choice, if you like, I have to make, all right? Obviously we do it collectively. And that's the balancing factor. But yeah, those with young families, it's difficult, and everything keeps adding up. And for some people, wage rises have been huge. I don't need to mention them, but you all know they are. But for others, they are genuinely struggling, and particularly those at the lower end of the income scale. I get that, but that is really what the welfare system should be for. I can't comment on that in detail, but I would just implore everybody to please put all of these factors together before you make the vote. So it's not an easy decision, absolutely promise you that.
Thank you. And maybe the fact that East Suffolk does a questionnaire on its council tax, maybe that's why they've got the biggest proportion of the people who've responded to this, because they're more used to commenting and having their say. So maybe that's something that the other districts and boroughs and the council and the county, maybe if they send out a questionnaire maybe they get more response because people understand that it's all parts of your council tax and not just the one part. Anyway, I think we've had some discussion about the questionnaire, and we do appreciate that you do try to get the questionnaire. Somebody else. But you can't force people to even if they know about it. So anyway, Councillor Bear.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes, I believe Labour does as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I seem to think I've seen figures, or they quote figures. Where they've got them, I don't know them. I just dream them up. But anyway. Just on the form, the consultant paper, I have never filled them in, and I do that deliberately, a bit different to my colleague on the right, is that I want to hear what people say. I don't want to impose my views, and I suppose deep down I can perhaps afford it. I take umbrage that my colleague says that the 61 to 80, because the majority of those people are most likely quite well off with property, but they haven't got a cash flow. They have a cash flow problem, and also the fact that they're on fixed incomes, a lot of them. So it does affect them, and I can understand why there's a high percentage of them. But the 25 to 50, 36%, that's over a third of them responded. They're the ones that are hardest hit, I think, in my opinion. They're the ones that criticise as well. So I do think that, there's reasons why perhaps councillors don't fill the form in, and mine is purely that I want to hear what people say, so I can come here with more of an open mind, believe it or not, because I do think you've done quite a good job, don't get me wrong there. But I'll leave my other bits to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Councillor Smith, did you have... Yeah, so I was going to move on to our other themes, which are to deal with the precept increase and the medium-term financial plan, as well as linking it to the police and crime plan, because I think those are important things that we're interested in. So I think Councillor Smith has been waiting to ask a question.
Yeah, before we get it in quick, it's only a short one. Last week I presented a report to the Suffolk overview and scrutiny about our previous meeting, and I also mentioned that this meeting we're having today, and I did say about the consultation, so hopefully some of them filled it in. And I mentioned that the precept was going to be around £15. I see now it's £14.94. That sounds like a bit of retail speak. You put something to 99p because it sounds less than a pound to me. So why you didn't just do £15, I don't know. But as they say, north of the border, many a mickle makes a mackle, doesn't it? Explain that one, I don't know. Anyway, the one question they did give me to bring to you was, what are you actually spending the increase on? Because apart from a vague statement, as you said earlier, that you'll be spending on technology to release more police time, as it were. It's very light on detail. Could you give us a bit more meat on the bone, if you like, as to what you may plan to spend that on?
Yes, I will give you, and then I'll ask Rachel to add a little bit on there. I mentioned in general terms the opportunities there are, be it robotics, AI. I couldn't give you specific programs, but those are the things that we know from elsewhere will make a lot of difference, and the productivity that can ensue because of that. Data harvesting, I know it sounds terribly boring, but if you look at the amount of time that officers and others spend analysing and taking data out and putting it together and so on, if that can be, if you like, mechanised, it will release quite a few hours. I don't have a specific number, but it's really, really important that it frees up police time to do that. And that's really what the thrust is about, which is why I said we can give an update later on in the financial year when we've got the programmes done. Through the procurement process, not really in a position to give specific names and so on, but there is a lot of work being done on that. If you look at the police digital service, some of the work at the College of Policing and elsewhere, there are huge opportunities, and we do need to have some of that funding. We are actually, David, only talking a difference of £1.4 million overall on the two options there, £10 be £5. And please remember all of the other issues there we're making that I've mentioned, which actually total more than that £1.4 million. So it's quite difficult. National insurance, victims commissioning, the council tax reduction scheme, that's a big slug of money. And again, the delay in courts processes, various things like that. We're not being funded in the longer term for wage increases, and if you want to ask more, Colette can talk about that. But I'll ask Rachel, would you just like to comment briefly on the technology side of it, please?
Thank you. Can I check everybody can hear me? And apologies for being slightly late this morning as well, but good to know that I wasn't alone. Yes, it's a good question. It's very difficult to be absolutely precise because it's a very fast and developing world. It is, in terms of an operational perspective, the opportunity to process, re-engineer what we do and how we do it through policing. If I can use the example that I think we're all familiar with now, which was the Right Care, Right Person initiative introduced in Suffolk in the last 18 months. It wasn't directly technology, but it did free up the equivalent of 7 full-time equivalent police officers every month. That is what I'm aiming to achieve by introducing digital technologies throughout the next year in a different way from Right Care, Right Person, which was process re-engineering with the staff that I actually had and what they do with their time. The technologies that will be introduced will allow them to spend their time differently on increased visibility, increased access across many of our rural and isolated areas, and also the requirement to do the processing that is the output of any AI or robotics that we may use. There is still a huge demand for face-to-face involvement of the actual police officer, and that's what I want to maximise, if you like. It's the USP of police officers, is their ability to talk directly to victims instead of having their heads down in a statement or a laptop which is recording the information. So by example, but only by example, only to illustrate my point, it is technologically possible now for a police officer to have a camera, to talk to a victim of a domestic abuse incident, and for all of the information that is required in a statement to be transposed between the two of them via a camera. The camera then is docked into the technology and a statement is produced. The police officer reads through the statement, makes some corrections, ensures that it is precise, but that time is reduced monumentally in terms of the time that it would otherwise take. There are a number of other forms and for example, domestic violence protection notices which can be put into place to put constraints around perpetrators. All of that is possible through a very quick solution delivered by a camera recording the verbal information from that victim. That is an area that is being explored. It's only an illustration. There are lots of reasons why we have to go through a number of areas with the rest of the criminal justice process, and that is the reason why it's difficult to be absolutely precise. I can't say I'm purchasing or I'm looking to purchase a certain equipment, but this will give me the opportunity to free up police officers' time to do that very important face-to-face victim support.
There's another one, David, as well, coming up in a couple of years or so. We've already started work on it. The Athena system, which is exchanging data, for want of a better word, between 9 forces, but also on a multi-agency basis. That needs further development so we can be far more proactive, and that's due to come online in 2 or 3 years' time. But of course, there's a lot of preparatory work, and that does require investment up front. I can't say any more than that because it's in a procurement process. So you have to take that on trust. But we are very happy to give an update later on in the financial year, possibly October, a verbal update as to where it's going. But it's really, really important. I don't know, Colette, if you want to add anything on the finances and other things there, which might help the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, just to come back to the kind of, we have gone to the £15 kind of query. We have gone to the maximum that we're able to do. So the government set the precept limits and say that PCCs can increase precepts by up to £15. However, locally we can only set council tax, which is divisible by 9 and 2 decimal places. So the closest we can get to £15 is £14.94. So we're not trying to kind of not go to the maximum. We're going to the maximum that we're able to do without a referendum limit within the boundaries that we can operate in. But just in terms of kind of what is the increase being spent on, most of the increase is being spent on increased costs. And that's when you look at the kind of the income tables that we've got in the MTFP, you can see, and Tim referenced it earlier, that the majority of funding, it's nearly kind of a 50-50 split almost between kind of central government funding and precept funding now. I think precept funding is about 45%. So whilst we do have a government grant increase in totality of 3.1% that's shown in the MTFP, pay accounts for kind of 80% of our total budget. We had a 4.2% pay award for officers and staff in September last year. We forecast another 3.5% pay award for officers and staff in September 2026. And so a 3.1% increase in government grants, which is only just over 50% of our total income, simply doesn't go far enough to cover kind of our basic pay, just to kind of keep in line with where we are from last year. So the majority of the precept increase goes on kind of the increased costs we incur just by running day to day as we have done last year.
Thank you. Councillor Smith wants to come back, and I have got Councillor Mason, Councillor Beer and Simon Furlong on my list. So, and then we'll have Councillor Finch. Thank you. So, Councillor Smith, if you want to come back.
Yeah, just on the, Rachel, you mentioned 7 full-time equivalents. Is all the savings frontline staff, or is some civilian staff? Is there, if it's some of that's done by civilian staff, is there scope there to perhaps bring another officer in? If that makes sense.
I'm not sure it makes total sense.
No, okay, it didn't make sense in my mind either.
I'll try and answer. So every year the constabulary goes through a savings programme to consider where we can make savings, and every part of the system, the organisation, is considered as to whether there is a reorganisation of process. So if a saving, for example, the 7 full-time police officers, that is predominant police officers, because they are the ones that were otherwise involved in the hands-on dealing with, in the case of Right Care, Right Person, those suffering from mental health. And that piece of work was then redesigned and taken predominantly over by our other colleagues in other support services such as health. Other areas of work, we are able to look across the whole organisation. So, for example, the Commissioner has mentioned the digital board, which takes in calls, live chat, the transformations that have been involved in the control room to manage people's calls differently. That's an area where we've been able to use police staff in a very different way. What we've actually been able to do is maximise our contact time with people, deliver a better service. We see that in the surveys and the satisfaction surveys that come back. So most recently, 3 out of 4 members, residents within Suffolk that have been surveyed for their satisfaction and confidence in Suffolk Constabulary say that they are very satisfied with our service. That is significantly higher than virtually every other police force across the country. And I do believe that our contact time through the control room is a large part of that. So it's a constant review of what is possible, how can we change that service, and how can we improve it. And that's before we even look at the increases in our response times, which is now 91% for any call made into the control room.
Thank you. I think, Simon, you wanted to come in specifically on that point, did you?
Yes.
And then I'll go to Councillor Mason.
Thank you. I suppose what I heard from the Chief Constable and kind of a bit of dichotomy between what Tim was saying earlier was around, I think what you were saying, Rachel, was that there will be some opportunity costs. However, there wouldn't be any direct saving, because as the PCC alluded to previously, actually there's a financial penalty if you drop below the number of serving police officers you have. So freeing up those 7 is not going to be a direct saving, a cashable saving. It's going to be opportunity cost, and it's going to be actually greater efficiency. And I'm all for that. I suppose what the panel would like to know is there any opportunity for direct cashable savings that is going to reduce the budget further down the line? Because that's the concerns I have. We can use technology to provide efficiencies and to enable your police officers to be much more efficient and not spend their time doing admin. But that won't directly save any or reduce the budget by any, because we have to maintain those numbers of police officers. So I suppose You may not have the examples yet, but what I would like to know is, how are we going to deliver some real cashable savings by use of technology if we agree this, or we don't agree, or we decide not to veto, or veto this proposal that's coming forward today?
Well, I think that's why we will promise to give an update I don't know, perhaps say at the October meeting when we've got some plans to sort out. We do have a transformation team, and we had I suppose, a summit, for want of a better word, in the heat in July, looking at various methodologies that we can use for that. So I think that's a very important point. Yes, it may not give a direct cashable saving, but actually if it improves productivity, it is an opportunity cost to do more, as Rachel says, about visibility, better engagement, face-to-face engagement. So yes, it's complicated, but please don't it's not just about that, it's about all these other difficulties we're going to have with finances going forward as well. It is part of it. That's an ongoing increase in productivity. But of course, the root of the problem here is the funding, saying you're getting all this extra money. Well, no, we're not getting all the extra money unless you get it from council tax. And I don't think it's fair, really, on the local taxpayer that Suffolk, once again, is at the bottom of the pile when it comes to funding, or relatively there. If you compare us with other big urban forces, they get money literally thrown at them. I mean, this year they've given even more money to the Met, as opposed to, as Colette has just explained, the financial settlement we have got. And it's hardly the best performing force in the country. But we have to deal with the here and now where we are. We've got to maintain that favourable position on crime data. If possible, we're all on the same page. You want to improve things, and that's what we're about. So that's why I'm asking, please give us that opportunity in order to move forwards, notwithstanding the difficulties that, of course, there are. I get it.
Thank you. So I'll go to Councillor Mason now. I think you've got a number of questions.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two. I'll ask the first one and then come back on the other. So in the context of the MTFP and the PCC's estates strategy, what opportunities has the PCC identified for co-location and partnership working, such as shared blue light facilities, to improve value for money, reduce long-term revenue and capital pressures, and support sustainable policing? And how have these opportunities been factored into future financial planning? Thank you.
That's a really good question, Joe, and thanks for that. And it's a very important one. I think if you look at our track record of what we've done, well, actually, before I was first elected, I think it's when it started, about co-location in different buildings, there is a whole list. We could talk, for example, of the Milden Hall Hub, where you've got many organisations there, and I think that cost £40 million. We are a bit part player there, but that has enabled many public sector bodies to come together, and these are really, really important things that we do. Before I was elected, there was that joint work with the County Council at Landmark House. I know things have moved on, but that was quite formative. And of course, we do cooperate with health up in Eye. We've got various other areas where we work with health and co-locate. That's really important. But of course, the biggest one is the one with Suffolk Fire and Rescue, where we've got 13 shared facilities county-wide, the biggest of which is just over the road here in Princes Street with the Joint Police Fire Station there. The one big new build we had, or have, is at Stowmarket, where we got money from the Community Infrastructure Levy, contributing £432,000 to a project with some government grants. I think that cost getting on for £4 million overall. Don't hold me to that figure. And we're always looking at other opportunities. You know, discussions at Haverhill. Peter knows about that. These are all in the medium-term financial plan. So there's a commitment to do what we can. We've got a major estates review that we're undertaking at the moment. Part of the challenge we've got here, of course, and I will refer to the white paper, what is the future of policing and where are we all going? That it's not necessarily an impediment, but we've got to be mindful if there are going to be major structural changes, what will that mean? Regardless of that, I think co-location of facilities is a really important factor. It saves money, can improve response, dialogue, interaction with residents and business. That's really important. Mustn't forget the business community, because that's where the wealth is generated. So it's a fundamental part of everything that we do and always has been. And without trying to be personalise it, I think as long as I'm here, that will definitely be something I'm a huge fan of, and I think we all are. and the savings there are enormous, and there's more to do. So very much part of the MTFP. If you look at some of the capital expenditure there, you will see there are items in there that will actually help fulfil that commitment. But it is really crucial, and we will carry on with that without doubt.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, I'm particularly interested in the ones in Haverhill, so thank you for your proactive work on that. Regarding the precept, so what alternatives to a near maximum council tax increase were seriously considered, including the use of reserves? At what point would the PCC consider it reasonable to draw down reserves rather than rely on further precept increases? And also, if the proposed near maximum precept increase is intended to protect frontline services, can you explain what this means for local community policing capacity and what trade-offs would arise for neighbourhood visibility if a lower precept was agreed?
Need your mic on.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, on the reserves, I'll ask Colette to give some more detail. But if you look at the papers there, yes, there are substantial quantities of reserves, and this is to some extent a bit of an old chestnut, okay, as we know, Simon. So, as with local authorities, keeping a general reserve, going back to the Belbin formula, that's really, really important, 3.5% of net revenue expenditure. We will always do that. If in an emergency we need to dip into that, of course we will do. We haven't had that, but we've got to keep it that way. Nearly all of the reserves are earmarked for capital expenditure. If you look at that, you looked at our estate, Sudbury, Haverhill, that is all in there. And if we don't get this through, that will compromise that, all right? We have to look at modernising the estate as we've just been discussing. So that's part of the reserves. The transformation of the control room, that is also in there, okay? That could be, I don't know, a further 5, 6, 7 million pounds. We have to work out the exact details, but also make sure we're using the best technology, and it changes so rapidly, that's got to be in there. If you look at insurance claims and so on, there are potential liabilities. Some of them are really large, so we have to have funding for that. Nearly all the capital expenditure we've got is included in there. So that's how we work it. What we need to do, and that's something we've really got to focus on, the constabulary's got to do so, is make sure its capital expenditure is on schedule as well as being on budget. Because there have been too many occasions, for various reasons, where it's fallen a bit behind. Now that needs to be focused, and we are all working collectively to make sure the money in there is used when it's supposed to be. That's crucial. Because if you always have a big lump stuck in reserves, I don't know what's the matter with this thing. Anyway, I'll carry on. Hopefully the feedback will not disappear. Oh, right, lean forward. Because you can't keep having a big lump of capital sat there doing nothing if it hasn't got a purpose. So that's something we're going to work really hard on this year to make sure the reserves are used on time as indicated. You can't be precise, of course, down to the last month, but I do think within a year, plus better explanation of what's happening. So I'm going to hand over to Colette, who can give you a little bit more detail on that, Joe, about what it's for, because this has come up before, and I think a more comprehensive analysis and feedback of what it's for would be helpful. So Colette, over to you, please.
Thanks, Joe. To be honest, Tim's covered quite a lot of it. We do. If you look at the reserves forecast, the movement in reserves forecast in Appendix F of the MTFP, you can see that we do plan to draw down on them, and not just in future years, and this year as well, and primarily for the purposes of capital funding, which Tim pointed out. And so over the course of the MTFP, there's quite a large, there's £20 million drawdown, mainly to fund capital purchasing over that time, which is a prudent way to fund capital. It's really good. It means we have to rely less on external borrowing. We're in a really good position in that respect in terms of kind of our external debt. There is some reserves that we have to maintain to manage our risks. So we've got a budget reserve, which we hold for insurance purposes in terms of if there's any insurance exposure that could come up in the year, which we're not planning to have. So we don't have it forecast in our day-to-day budget, but could come in. We hold the budget reserve for that purpose. And equally, we've got risks in terms of our assumptions in the MTFP. We only know what our settlement is for this year. We don't know what our settlement is for future years. We don't know what the pay award will be even halfway through this year. So there's a certain amount of risk in our assumptions contained within the MTFP as well, for which that budget reserve, held primarily as a contingency reserve, is there to kind of support in that respect, where we don't necessarily plan in the MTFP to draw down on that contingency, but we have it there should we need to draw down on that contingency. So I think we're kind of comfortable with the reserve position in that where we think we can utilise them, we do, and we forecast to utilise that for capital expenditure. And where there's an amount we think we have to hold for risk, we keep behind so that we're not exposed in future. I think the problem with kind of forecasting to draw it down on day-to-day expenditure is that eventually it does run out if we kind of plan to fund our recurrent expenditure through a non-recurrent source, even though kind of there is reserves there. Eventually one day that will run out because it's a finite amount. So we look to fund capital because it's obviously can be one-off expenditure as opposed to kind of recurrent expenditure through the reserves that we're able to utilise.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you for that. It's really helpful to understand. The second part of that question, I'm particularly passionate about local community policing. We've got some great local community police officers in Haverhill. If a lower precept was adopted, what trade-offs would arise for neighbourhood visibility if that was to happen?
Well, I think I couldn't give a precise number, but I think the problem we would have, Joe, if you take £1.4 million, so if we went to option 1, the 10 quid, £1.4 million is probably enough to employ about, I'm estimating here, 20 odd police officers, 22 or 3. So if you had to lose them, which you can't do because of the penalties regarding if you don't keep your numbers up to 1425, the only other way you could do that then would be to actually reduce the number of staff. And the reason I mention that is because of this rather odd, well, I think ridiculous system of way we get penalised for that. You're now ending up, because you have to keep the headcount up, you're putting officers back doing jobs that civilians would do. You would never run a business like this, but that's the Home Office for you. And I do mean that. It is utterly ridiculous. So the answer is you would have less people, less visibility of frontline officers, because you would then have to be putting some of them back to do jobs that the staff would be doing. If you look at the way staffing numbers have been rationalised, bearing in mind that huge collaboration that I've already mentioned at the beginning with Norfolk, saving 57 million quid per year, I think it would be to the detriment of frontline policing. I couldn't say, I don't think any of us could exactly where and when, but the general drift would be, without that £1.4 million, you will have a compromise on visibility and public engagement. That 1.4 million will enable us to maintain that, and then with the use of technology, okay, then we should be able to improve that. And I think it's really, really important we do more for rural communities and market towns. And with the greatest respect for those people who represent the bigger urban areas, it isn't just about them. People in rural areas pay their dues and taxes like everybody else. So we need to try and do it all. And I will reiterate again, bearing in mind the resources we've got, I think the constabulary does a very, very good job. There's no doubt about that. You look at the data, but of course there is always room for improvement. And I would love to develop more of this joint collaboration. You know, you work with the community safety partnerships and others. There is a lot more to do, so we can do a damn sight more to prevent crime in the first place. That hardly ever gets mentioned, but it should be, because the obvious thing, longer term thinking, that's also part of this. What are we going to do collectively, all responsible authorities, that's local authorities, ourselves, health and others, to reduce it? Rachel's mentioned about right care, right person. I mentioned earlier about county lines and drugs. What are we doing collectively to reduce demand? You look at shoplifting. Where is the public health element to get people cleaned up, etc.? So there's a huge amount to do on this so we can make Suffolk an even better place. And I can absolutely assure you, I wouldn't have come to this committee, this panel, and recommended that increase if I didn't think that was what's best for Suffolk. I'm a Suffolk bloke through and through, every day of my life so far, and it's really, really important we get this put across. I'm not here just raising taxes because I think it's a good idea. I don't as such. But if we don't keep this policing at where we need to keep it, then I think we will all be disadvantaged. And anybody who votes against it, it's entirely up to you. I would just say, please bear that in mind. mentioned the estates programme. That's really important. So those who think about that, there is a lot. It could be quite an exciting future, but we've got to do that. And you're there to hold us to account, absolutely. And that investment we're making, we'll come back in October and give you an update. It's not my nature to promise things that we don't do. I absolutely guarantee that. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like that question, Councillor Mason, because my view is you've mentioned the two options in your paper, and clearly option one is not going to produce a balanced budget, so you couldn't do it anyway. So what would be really useful is to have that analysis. If we pick the lower value, in order to make our budget balance, we would have to make so many cuts that that is what people want to know, really, because clearly at the moment option one isn't an option because it doesn't give you a balanced budget. So maybe it's just the way it's presented to me as a naive person who doesn't really do accounts, but that's what I would have liked to have seen.
Yeah. Could I have one other point, Sarah? This, for the first time I can remember, when we had to draw up all these plans, we did not have all the financial details of the settlement. Damned if I know why. And I'm not trying to make a political point. I'm trying to make it from a point of view of how you have to run things. And I just mentioned the neighbourhood policing guarantee. Well, we didn't know about that till, I think it was Monday or Tuesday. Well, why couldn't that have been done when we had the financial settlement in the first place? I know it's £1 million, but that's actually, that's a big chunk of that 1.4 million. So the savings have still got to go on. So please bear that all in mind. That's the reality. It's not a political point, it's the reality. That is what's happened. The neighbourhood policing guarantee, you've got to employ 16 extra officers, and we have not got anywhere. We barely got, in fact, we haven't even got half the amount of money to do it. So if you put those two together, that's more than 1.4 million quid anyway. So if you don't want that, well, fine, but what do you do? Really difficult position. Then we get clobbered £80,000 for each officer under 1,425, just for one. It doesn't cost £80,000 to employ one. What a ridiculous system, but that's where we are, out of my control.
And out of ours too. I've got Councillor Beer, who I think wants to come in. I think Simon's got another question. Councillor Finch, I've got Franstine Jones, and I've got Councillor Chester. So I've got... Yeah.
Did you hear that? Sorry.
I don't think your mic was on.
No, it is now.
I did hear you, but...
As we have just started talking about that drop, negative of £1 million for the police guarantee, is that what that figure is?
Yes. No. Hotspot policing is £1 million, right? We had a grant for that last year, and I think...
And it's been taken away?
We only heard that we're not having it.
Right.
Okay.
So the question is that in the budget or not in the budget?
No, it's not, because it wasn't guaranteed before it came in. We didn't have any confirmation, no news on it. It wasn't in the budget, but it's a grant which was primarily financing additional overtime on patrols. So whilst the cost isn't in the budget, and neither was the income, so net nil impact, but obviously it's got an operational impact on the streets in terms of decisions to be made in terms of it was really good work that's being done, and how to continue to do that without the additional funding.
So you're going to keep that as a result of wanting to have the £15?
Well, it's difficult, but if we didn't have that option too, it would make it far more difficult to do it, because we've got to find that shortfall from somewhere. So we're keeping on with the...
Thank you.
Yeah. So don't forget, we've still got that 2.8+ million savings that we're doing, and if we have to try and do more and bring this forward, of course we'll do that, because we want to maximise the funding to go on to frontline policing, absolutely, always.
Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, at least two of my questions have been asked by my colleague, Councillor Mason, so I won't repeat them. There is one I will come on to. But before I start, I'd just like to make it quite clear that I personally think that the police are doing a good job with what you've got, and that you officers, you chief officers, are doing what you believe to be right and the best you can do in the circumstances. And you, Commissioner, I think you come here, and this must be your worst meeting of the whole year, because you have to, yes, all right, but you come here and you take questions and criticisms and answers and all that. And unfortunately, I do have some criticisms and concerns, which I will come to now. First of all, you commented about the future, and the government have stated that they may want to reduce from 43, I think it is, down to a much smaller number. I'm not altogether sure that commitment sort of isn't a bad thing for the future. We've only got to look at Scotland. They've only got one national police force, and that seems to work there. But that's, you mentioned that, so I'm just saying that there is another side to it. You told us that all your increases, the penalties you have, the courts and all them, they're all really things that the government should be sorting out, and that burdens comes down and burdens onto you, which is unfortunate. The couple of points I wanted to pick up was the consultation response. I accept what you said, Sandra, and I understand you put a lot of work into that, but it is really a pathetic response out of the amount of people out there. But we have to work with what we've got. I understand that. The people that I've spoken to in the last fortnight, since I heard your radio comments that you were proposing a nearly £15 increase, have been from people who are concerned, and from all walks of life. The majority of them, I would say, working people. Yes, there was some pensioners and older people that were upset about it, and I am disappointed in the fact that for the last 5 years you've increased the council tax, I believe, £15 out of for four of them, and then £10 out of another one, that it's not really gone down. And I can't see it going down, and particularly as the way you've said that we've got to go forward, it's going to get more expensive for everybody. But the public out there are struggling. They really are struggling. And we have to find some other way of doing this, whether it's cutting some of the expensive staff, I don't know, but there is one way, which I think you haven't acted as quickly as you could have done, and I know that it's coming up in March, and that is an update on the Sudbury Police Station, but to me, that could have been sold a long time ago. There was a space coming up near the fire station in Sudbury, which is right opposite the Silk Mills, which has gone defunct now and being sold. The car park on the opposite side, right beside the fire station, I think is available, which would be enough room to put a police station beside them. Why you haven't looked at these, why this hasn't been on your radar, I don't know. But that would have been some improvement. Now, the people have been saying to me that all this extra money, they haven't seen any extra police on the beat. Now, I understand what they mean by that, and I've explained to them this day and age, we've got to have them in cars and on bikes and other things, and the technology. But they're still concerned that they don't see enough police on the beat in my area anyway, that's Sudbury, Cornard, Melford. And at the end of the day, it's their perception as to how they look at this. And we really can't continue to just keep laying on and putting up the council tax, because the government is saying, well, if you don't do that, we're not going to give you this extra money. That's blackmail. And if whatever governments are doing that, that's disgrace on their part. But at the end of the day, 43% of them said no, they didn't want this increase. So really, there's quite a percentage of people there that are disgruntled, unhappy, and don't want this increase to take place. And I, for one, Madam Chairman, will not be able to support this when we come to it later. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you can answer some of those points, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you for your comments, Peter. It's entirely up to you how you vote, but I maintain what I've already said. And I've always said to you, I absolutely understand. I have no pleasure in putting up extra taxes, clearly. The reality is successive governments of all colours have done nothing about the police funding formula. They all seem to have this obsession with big urban areas, and I'm sick of it. But I have to deal with the here and now, okay? And it's as simple as that. Compromising what we're doing, and I have to look longer term. Let me cast your mind back to when I first started, 2 years on the trot, I took the freeze grant. I think it is reprehensible, and this is the long-term part, that money has been frozen at that amount of money we got for doing the freeze grant for 13 years. In fact, I think the police authority did it for a couple of years or a year before that. Had that money actually gone up with the level of government funding, instead of being discriminated against, which is what all governments are doing, we would have another, I think, £2.5 million a year if that had gone up in line with the government funding, which has gone up. The budget, yes, when I started, I think it was about 120 million quid. Next year, it'll be over 200 million quid. So there's a big increase, but that is over 13 years. And if you look at inflation, etc., that's where we are. So please think about that. Well, if you've already made your mind up, there's not much else I can say. But if others are wavering, do understand that the freeze grant, it's difficult. Now, yes, we could say, well, we won't put taxes up at all, but I think the result you would then have would be so detrimental it doesn't actually bear thinking about. That is the reality. So looking longer term, we have no commitment from the government about what they're going to do with pensions. I think police pensions, the actuary said, was it last year, so for the financial year, the contribution, employers' contribution, got to go up to 35% plus. Now, what do you do about that? I have no choice on that. It's not for staff, that's for police officers. I'm not criticising that. It's not a funded scheme. It's all very well, but I have to make ends meet. We have to balance the budget. And it's all very well saying, well, fine, don't do it. What am I supposed to do? Where do you get that money from? I didn't decide things like that. I didn't decide about the removing on the freeze grant, hotspot policing, these other initiatives. I didn't decide to reduce funding for victims. That is a major issue for me because of all the work we do. Now, if some people are ambivalent about that, well, that's up to them. Well, I'm jolly well am not. I do care about victims. The court system, this actually goes back over 20 years, the shambles there. I never agreed with closing courts, magistrates' courts in Bury and Lowestoft. In fact, I can remember Sandra and we spent a long time campaigning on that. We went up to see the minister, and there was announcements. The next day, by the time we put the consultation in, the next day they decided to close it. That consultation was a complete waste of time. I nearly drove off the road, I was so annoyed. But I mean it, seriously, Peter. And that extra work for keeping in touch with victims, witnesses and defendants, I've got no choice on that. Or, I mean, it's a disgrace that some victims are left for over 2 years. We're still waiting for a plan to put that right. The early release of prisoners, many of them are getting recalled. It doesn't work. Something had to be done. Again, I'm not making a political point. We are where we are. This is the reality. But if you want to keep people safe, we've got to have the people there to do it. I would love to be able to say we can freeze the funding and not put it up at all. But in all honesty, I can't say that because I just don't think it would work. I get the point about Sudbury. That is in there. If you look, there's a 3 million thing in the MTFP. I don't have the capacity. I'll be criticised. We'll go and employ a whole load of extra staff. What are you doing that for? People want frontline policing. Absolutely. And what I mean by that, it's going into the visibility. It's not as straightforward as that. Far more crime is now online, domestic abuse and violence, sexual offences, hidden harm, as we've said many times before, are not the thing you see walking down the street. But it is a balance. Keeping our town centres safe and market towns is crucial, and visibility plays a key role in that. And as regards visibility, that new policing programme that came in December 23 has given a marked change in visibility. If we had the same level of funding as some other force, we'd probably have another 200 or 300 officers, but we don't. We still have that very safe track record here, so we've got to look at what we've got and be thankful for it. And I know everybody is. You did say the police do a very good job. I absolutely get that, appreciate that. But it is so frustrating as to what to do. But you deal with what we have now. How do we go forward? better collaboration amongst partners really helps. I spoke about crime prevention, and there are many things that other agencies could do to help collectively, and that's why our grants programme is really important. I haven't actually put that up, the crime disorder reduction grant, since I started, but I do think that needs to be improved, because the work with charities helping young people disadvantaged, and there are several of you in this room who know organisations that have benefited from that. Well, I'm not prepared to sit here and just compromise that and get rid of it. We've also helped with the Suffolk Community Foundation. We made the biggest donation for the Suffolk Futures Fund, and there are a lot of organisations, they probably haven't heard about them yet, that will be benefiting from that county-wide. And these things, in my view, very often are worth their weight in gold, because it's not just about young people, it's about helping victims as well to come to terms with what's happened, or give them a real purpose in life, doing employment. So there's a lot in that. I absolutely understand where you're coming from, and in normal circumstances, I would say I agree. I don't want to put taxes up, but we have to deal with where we are. So it's really, really important. And that estate side of it, that is in the programme. We've got the review. We have to look at capacity. We had to do something about the control room because of HMIC and their reports on that. We don't want to get negative comments. So that's been a very protracted negotiation with the County Council, far longer than it needed to be. I won't comment on the details of that, but you've driven me round the bend, literally. That took nearly 3 years to deal with. I don't want to go into details, but that's the reality. So it isn't just about policing. We want to do these things and move on. I just wish sometimes certain people would have a bit more get up and go about them, let's put it that way. I better not say anything else because it might be misconstrued.
Thank you.
But no, they were a big opportunity. I absolutely agree with you. And I do appreciate your compliments. And I will speak up for Sandra on this, not that she needs speaking up for. It is so frustrating, the amount of work that went into that survey. And I'll tell you something else, everybody. If we'd spent a lot more, some people in the past suggested doing a postal survey, you'd have, what on earth are you spending money on that for? So we all have a responsibility to help each other, and that's one of the great things about this panel, how we work together. And I don't mind the tough questions, because I'll answer them back. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just admit to being one of those no voters, but more because I'm more frustrated with the whole way that police is financed. And I think it's shocking that 50%, only 50% of your funding is coming from central government. That's what I'm more upset about. And I understand that in order to maintain the services with increasing costs, somebody's got to pay somewhere. And if the government aren't coughing up the money, then unfortunately, it has to come from somewhere. Otherwise, we will have fewer police seen on the street. And I would just like to comment that in the last 2 weeks, I've seen 2 police vehicles in Elmswell and 2 in Stowmarket, whereas in the past I hardly ever saw any. So there are a few more of them about. So I'm now seeing the benefit of having a few more police in the area. So anyway, I think we've now got Simon, if you've still got a question. Then just to reiterate, Councillor Finch, are you still coming back, or have you said your piece? Right, I've got Franstine, I've got Councillor Chester, and I've got Councillor Bennett, and I've got Councillor Smith-Lyte now as well. So in that order, we've got, I know, and we've got Councillor Cook. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I'll try and break them down to make it slightly easier. My first point has already been picked up by Madam Chairman in relation to option. I don't believe option 1 was an option because, as I say, you actually stated in there it's not setting a balanced budget, which obviously you need to be able to do financially. My first question really, I think, is both to Chief Constable and to yourself, Tim, is we've seen the white paper come out. We either agree or disagree with the principles that are set out in that. There's 2 elements to that for me. Have you looked at the next 4-year, the medium-term financial plan, to look at areas which, if, and I know this is probably the next Parliament, that the white paper will finally be kind of followed through, but are there areas there around some of the national policing elements that have come out where we are not going to do something that we're saying we're going to do in the plan, especially around capital funding? Now, I know you need to keep your operational police running, so I do understand that. But my concern is we will be investing locally into something that potentially will change, and is that just kind of throwing taxpayers' money away? So that's the first question. Have we just done a quick and dirty look against the MTFP to say, actually, we may not want to do that in this term. We may want to do it, put it off until future years. And the second element around that part of the question is, from my experience, reform of emergency services, bringing them together, does cost a lot of money. It costs time, and I'm sure Rachel will be more than aware of, having to put a transformation board with chief constables in together, working together, trying to look at how we equalise a number of things, bring ICT together, bring operational elements together, but also around kind of the financial side and equalisation of council tax. So are you going to put that into the budget as well? Because that will cost a considerable amount of money. So if I leave it there, then I'll come back onto the other elements that I've got.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, the white paper, remember everybody, it's a white paper. It's not on the statute book. There's a long, long way to go. One of the elements that makes me particularly nervous about megaforce is, well, I know I don't agree with megaforce. I don't mind if we were to say, for example, it worked out financially, and you're absolutely correct, the financial complication of this could be vast. I don't think the government's even looked at this properly yet, but it is a white paper, not on the statute book. I didn't mention Police Scotland. We had a very good briefing yesterday at our Police and Crime Commission's conference in London on the experiences of Police Scotland, where they put 8 forces into 1. There are a whole list of difficulties that still have not been resolved 11 years on. That is about the remoteness of rural areas, not surprisingly. It tends to be dominated by the Midland Valley, Glasgow and Edinburgh, and even in the southern uplands there is disquiet there. You've got to remember, of course, Scotland has a completely different finance system. No local council tax goes into it. The government decides how many officers you have and what the budget will be. So that's done at the moment by the SNP government, all right? So it's a very, very different system. The accountability, again, has caused difficulties, because how many committees do you have and where do you have them for one single body? My concern is if you have, let's say we had to be amalgamated with, I don't know, 3 other forces, and if you look at the mass, that would be the thrust that I would suggest we're going to. I think particularly for Norfolk and Suffolk, we will be out on a limb. It will be dominated potentially by an area like Cambridge. Would you end up with little fiefdoms everywhere? Would you end up with a postcode lottery? And is that what people in Suffolk really want? The liquidation of their police force? I don't think so. But some of the things do make sense to put into a bigger issue. Dealing with organised crime groups, okay, yes, if you want to boost up things like the National Crime Agency into whatever this new organisation is called, fine. But I would say this, ERSU, the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit, is the best performing ROCU in the country if you look at the data. Any of these big changes have got to be substantially better than the status quo. I've asked the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister on more than one occasion, where's the evidence, and there hasn't been any. So we need to look before you leap, and that's one hell of a leap to do this. I don't know what the proposals are, but I'm very, very concerned that we will lose the performance we got, 3rd lowest crime rate. A megaforce is going to improve that, because what's the heck's the point of doing it if they don't? If you look at forces, the cost of money, I was being slightly diplomatic when I said we're all in different financial positions. I don't know the details for other forces, but what I do know, some of them have got enormous debts. There's a change in the level of council tax that's all variable. For example, Norfolk, I think, costs 20, 25 quid per year more on council tax on average per resident. Would you want, if you amalgamate forces, and say we are in a better position than any of the others, is it right that the Suffolk taxpayer forks out to cover debts for others? I don't think so. So unless government puts central funding in to resolve this, then I see problems ahead. Organisational cultures, that's always a big issue, and that's a big thing that Police Scotland have said. It's a real difficulty for them up there. And this is 11 years on without all the debates of how it is put up and financed. So I am worried about it, but we need to see where we are. I think we need to see what public reaction is. Has anybody actually asked the public what they want? I don't think so. So where's the evidence of this? Because if you don't have public support and trust and confidence in big changes, I think you will damage policing. Our trust and confidence figures are improving. I think Rachel mentioned that earlier. And we do not want to jeopardise that. And one of the other problems is some of the things that have happened in what tends to be the large urban forces, that's where the damage to trust and confidence has come from. So that's another issue to look at. I mentioned earlier the National Police Air Service is hardly a shining example of what works best nationally. It's awful, actually. It's far worse for Norfolk, actually, than it is Suffolk. So, and you look at other national organisations, big is not always better. We don't want a postcode lottery. So this needs to be approached very, very carefully. I would love to hear what is the rationale for doing it. Some of the things, standard IT systems, some of the things you could do for procurement, having a uniform similar, absolutely. I've said for years, why on earth don't we have a single vetting system and standards across all 43 forces? So there are things that could be done. I gather, although I haven't been given the information, work is now being done on a national firearms licensing thing. We had a presentation yesterday. I wasn't really aware of that. But again, there are things that could be done. So do you have a common standard? So, but we will take that into account before there are major decisions on anything. So there's the flexibility, particularly looking at the estate and things like that. We need to be aware of it all.
Yeah, I think. Thank you for that. I think that was. I think we understand your views on necessarily on the amalgamation of constabularies and forces, bringing them together. I have my own views. I think regional controls in fire were one example of a government-driven thing which never happened and was very cost millions. I'll come on to ESMP in a minute around my next question. But I suppose what I was asking, whether you agree or disagree with it, we're here today to discuss the budget. Have we taken the opportunity to look at this budget and say, whoa, hang on a minute, we put this in for, I don't know, 29, 30, and actually let's just pause and think about that going forward, especially around those areas that are potentially counter-terrorism or those areas that may potentially go to a national agency. Property, there'll probably then be less staff employed by whatever the version, but in the geographic area of Suffolk, we don't know, and I accept there's a lot of don't knows, but we don't want to be investing and committing financial money to areas where it's not going to be a responsibility for us in the future, albeit policing is a national responsibility anyway.
If you look at the MTFP, if you went for option one, you look at the huge amount of savings you would need to have made in 4 years' time. I think it's here about financial resilience and stability. We've got to look longer term because everything is changing. I mean, I'm not being melodramatic. The world is a dangerous place. Heaven only knows what might happen next. And good policing is really, really important to make sure they've got the, I suppose, it is about the resilience, isn't it, going forward and so on. And you can talk about other natural events, disasters. If we had a gale like in 1987 or whatever it happens to be, you've got to be ready. So there is an element of long-term planning, which is one of the reasons for looking at option two. That's the preferred choice, because if you didn't do that, and I think the figures is £7 or £8 million of extra savings within 4 years. But I'll hand over to you, Colette, because you've got the details and I can't remember them all.
Thanks, Simon. I think it's a really good question. Yes, kind of the quick and dirty look has been done immediately for next year in terms of the capital spend and the capital programme. So our capital programme is made up of Table A and Table B for next year. Table A has already been approved. Table B, kind of business cases submitted yet to be approved. There's a couple in there which could be impacted by the white paper on the Table B, but on the Table A side, to be honest, most of those are operational needs in the immediate. The white paper is obviously, it's a white paper, hasn't been passed through legislation yet, and talks about a time frame of 2034. So the need for kind of immediate operational resources. Sorry,
can you bring your mic a little bit closer and speak into it?
That time. But yes, just in terms of kind of the forecast capital spend that has been approved for next year will be not impacted by the white paper that was published on Monday of this week. So that even though the MTFP was published beforehand, which timing-wise mentioned hasn't been helpful, for the years 3 to 4 of the MTFP, I think there are a few items in there which will be impacted and we would have kind of more detailed discussions ongoing. But for the Table A approved items for next year, I don't think it will have much impact.
Thank you for that. I think that does put option one in a different light around the potential savings that will be needed in future years, accepting that it wouldn't set a balanced budget in this year.
Can I? Not exactly, because the savings kind of needed for future years aren't based on capital spend. they're based on kind of our revenue budget spend, which wouldn't be impacted in the same way. So in terms of the capital expenditure, kind of what you can do joined up force-wise, potential for a couple of items in future years to be looked at in terms of our revenue budget kind of in the medium term. If you think that the white paper is setting objectives for 2034, medium-term financial plan still goes up to 2930. From a revenue budget perspective, no, I wouldn't say in terms of kind of those medium-term savings needed.
Thank you for that. It brings me on to my second question then, which was it's the old chestnut, and I know it's been raised by Councillor Mason around use of reserves. I think Chief Constable gave a really good example of technology that we're doing that. Could that not be funded out of reserves rather than increasing the precept? Because you said that was one of the areas of transformation. I still believe the reserves, and accepting the point around the general reserves and the budget reserves, there are still reserves in there around change that show no change over 4 years. And I know we've discussed this in the past, that there are unknowns that come in, but I haven't seen those change in the 2 years I've been sat here. So I am nervous about the level of reserves that are being held. And I know, Tim, you said you were going to look at this during the year, and I think that's a real positive for me. But I do think that needs to be prioritised, because there is a high level of reserves outside of those that you have to maintain for insurance and general finance and accounting. And if I take the OPCC reserve, if you applied the same principle of 3.5%, after 4 years you're still sitting at 744,000, which is more than 50% of the operating costs of the office. So I do think that can be used. That could be used, invest to save. I'm not saying, and I know we've raised that in the first, so I would, and this is a request that you do look at it during this year and come back to the panel with that. And I suppose my last item is around the capital programme, and I mentioned it earlier. I retired from fire in 2021 now, thankfully. And as Chief Officer, I was sat on the ESMCP board for the previous 5 years. I notice it still hasn't been delivered, and there is a £10 million cost in the capital budget over MTFP of that. When are we going to, or I suppose it's a question for Rachel around the MPCC and Chief Constables, when are we going to say enough is enough? Because this must have cost millions of pounds already. This has been running for over 10 years now, and we still have not delivered it. And £10 million is not a small, and there will be ongoing revenue costs, I'm sure, as Rachel would be aware. So at some point, we've got to stop. And I know the rationale was the radio frequency was going to be going, but it hasn't gone. And I'm not sure there is a massive issue with communications across the emergency services. So it just seems I know it's quite operational, but it's £10 million over the MTFP. It just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I agree. Rachel can comment on that in a minute. This is so frustrating. This emergency service network, they've been going on about this. The Home Office, they're the people in the dock for this. They've been attempting to run this project ever since I was elected. 13 years, well, you know more about it than I do. It is utterly ridiculous. But the problem is, what do you do? So if the Home Office says, right, we're going to do this, now you're going to have to fund it yourselves, what are you supposed to do? Then you get it mandated. We would like some clear direction, though, of is this going to happen or not? You've been fiddling about for 13 years. You still haven't got anywhere. The inactivity is actually costing more money because of keeping the old system going, as you know, which is I think it's a scandalous waste of taxpayers' money, actually. But I can't do anything about it, apart from make representations, which I do at every opportunity. That's right. On the point of reserves, and certainly our reserve in the OPCC, we are starting to defray that now to use it to make up other gaps. And I mentioned the point, we haven't put up the crime disorder reduction grant, but we're going to be using reserves to do that accordingly, and that's the whole point. I don't know what's going to happen with all this stuff of white paper mayoral elections and how are you going to do it. There will be costs for rationalising, potentially, depending on what model you have. And if the government has given no commitment they're going to fund it, we'll have to do it from our own resources. So that's very, very unhelpful indeed. I absolutely get the point about reserves, and we will make sure those things that are programmed, that's why I said it earlier, they've got to be done on time, on budget, and that's really, really crucial that those things are fulfilled. And if they're not, then there needs to be a proper explanation. That Landmark House one, taking 3 years to negotiate that, is ridiculous. Now, I'm not going to say any more than that, but I'll leave that thought with you. That was certainly not a delay on our part, because you've got to make sure the plans are accurate, realistic, the price is fair value for the taxpayer, etc., etc. I don't need to go on about all that. But there's no need for it to have taken that long at all. But it did, but we are there now. And that is huge frustration that we all have, because of course these things need to get on with. I mean, you talked about Sudbury, Peter. Well, that's an example, isn't it? What is happening? So, and I think a comprehensive analysis of those reserves, if that's what you need, what they're for, will be helpful. I'll give another example on that. So, our motor insurance, yes, the overall premiums, that's been good, but of course then the issue there is the excess has shot up a lot, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds there, so we have to allow for that as well. Again, that's a detail, but I think in a workshop you can perhaps do a comprehensive list exactly what the reserves are for, when they're due to be spent, and who's in charge of doing it. That might help you all, but I do take the point that, I don't know, Rachel, whether you want to say anything about the emergency services network, probably not, but...
I think both of the speakers have covered it in your levels of frustration, which I would only add to, and it's probably not beneficial to this meeting, but there is just one point that I'd make about the technologies, and I gave the example earlier. Each of these technologies now comes with licensing and ongoing costs. So whilst it may appear that we could buy off the shelf a technology to improve a system, as I'd explained earlier, there are ongoing costs which need to be taken into account, which would obviously sit outside of the use of reserves.
Thank you. So I've now got Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm sorry, my next subject is actually to go back to Landmark House, basically for clarification, because in your opening presentation, I mean, first of all, how long is the whole building owned by the police? Yep. Has it always been owned by the police?
No, it's been 50% owned by the county council.
Well, that's what I thought.
So the county council wanted to dispose of their half share.
Yes, exactly.
And we're doing that, and there are arrangements still being worked on the details, so that trading standards will remain there. That's a very important function. Of course, we've got the joint approach with that. That's another thing I didn't mention. I think that was Joe was talking about estates, but that, and obviously the safeguarding side of it, demand for that's going up. So they'll stay there. We've just got to sort out the details for rental on that. It doesn't include the conference centre, all right? So it's the big tower block, if you like. That's the one that we are going to own completely.
Detail, but the point I would like to ask is, what effect has that had of the county council coming out on your revenue? Any at all?
Well, no, it's not made it. Well, obviously we've got the greater running costs of the other half of the building.
Yes.
So there will be that. But then the rental that's being paid by, or will be paid by trading standards, because there won't be any ownership and some of the other functions there.
That's what I'm getting to.
It's beneficial overall for us financially, because we can relocate some other people in other rented buildings from elsewhere in the vicinity.
Specific.
You're making a capital spend of 7 million on Landmark House in the capital budget.
Oh, right, it's not as straightforward as that. There's the purchase price, so that's, I think, confidentially, it's confidential. That's not for the whole spending of the building itself. We would have to spend a major amount on technology. By far the bigger part, I think 5 or 6 million, something like that, is on the improvement for the control room, which we would have had to spend at headquarters or wherever it was, okay? But I can't go into any more details there. I don't want you to think that we're spending all that just on a building, because we're not.
Have you got a more generic question, Councillor Finch? Because we've got a lot of people who do want questions. Right, thank you. Thank you. I'll now go to Franstine.
Yes. Just wanted to say thank you, Sandra, for providing us with the data from the survey. Found that really interesting. Shame about the low numbers, but you have no control over that. But it does lend to the question that I want to ask with regards to about the report states that the equality and diversity and human rights implications have been considered. So I'm asking, how has the PCC assessed whether a near maximum precept increase has had an adverse impact on protected groups, in particular disabled people, single parent households, older people and racially minoritized communities who are overrepresented in the low income bands?
Well, I hope it has not had a disproportionate effect. I couldn't sit here in all honesty and say yes or no to that. But that is really what the welfare system is for. I mentioned pension credit, which is available to everybody. I am very conscious of that, but I do think the extra funding, I think it's fair to say, and this might be anecdotal, so forgive me for that, very often when you get higher levels of crime, it tends to affect areas that are less wealthy, more impoverished, deprived areas accordingly. Now, we, as we all know, do have deprived areas in Suffolk. We've got some of the most deprived districts in the whole country. The policing council tax is part of that element, and I do understand the difficulty. We've spoken about that several times. There's never any intention, obviously, to do this at the expense of any protected characteristic groups whatsoever. I have to look at it in the overall scheme of things. But one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about, as I think you know, Franstine, helping disadvantaged groups, those with protected characteristics, that's really, really important. We do everything possible through our grants, victims and so on, and we do a lot on that. For example, if we're looking at domestic abuse and violence for minority ethnic communities, that's why we are big supporters of Molyn and Phoebe. Obviously, you know we work with ISCRI and others. So that work has got to continue, and if possible, we will expand that, because that's how it works. That Suffolk Futures Fund I mentioned earlier, that is helping some of those organisations as well. So it's something very dear to my heart about how we can actually help these communities. I think the track record that we have as a team of doing that is really important. If you look at what we're doing with Clear Hold Build, that tends to be in areas of high levels of serious crime and deprived communities. I don't want to stereotype it, but the reality is if you look at that. So that's really, really important work. And I hope the welfare system, that's what it's designed for, helps those that are in difficulty, particularly the group's protected characteristics that you've mentioned. That's crucial.
Thank you.
So just to clarify the question that I'm asking, with regards to section 149 of the Equality Act and your duty to pay due regard, how have you evidenced that your decision to the options you've given for raising the precept has not had an unfair or disproportionate impact on those households that
We've communicated with all groups we work with, including ISCRI, all the ones, the charities that we work with, all of them, asked them for feedback, and well, I don't think we could have done much more. And that's the whole point, including the business community, and that covers a wide range of people. It's not just the big corporates. And the feedback we get from them, regular correspondence and regular meetings with them. I've mentioned it at all the areas I've been to in the last few months as well, the difficulty. So I couldn't say we've formalised it as such, but certainly they've all been contacted to give their feedback and so on. And it is an important issue. It is about the whole of Suffolk, and I absolutely assure you on that. It's how we do that specifically. And you've got the data there of those that responded to the survey, which I think, looking at different age groups and more or less reflecting the varying ethnicities we've got in Suffolk. I know it's a small sample, but we certainly did what we could. Well, Sally did what she could, not me.
Okay. In response to that then, have you done an impact assessment? Has the PCC's office done, with regards to paying due regard to the impact of your decision or your options that you put forward? According to the Equality Act, you have to show what due regard you've taken on the impact that it may have those from protected groups, and that's my question.
Part of the way it was all drawn up when the papers were done, so the answer to that is yes. Whether it could have been more, I think that's certainly something that we could look at for future years, and we will do. But if you've got ideas of how we could improve that, other organisations we could contact, get feedback from. Very happy to do that, of course, always.
Thank you. Councillor Chester.
That took a long time, Chair. Thank you. I think you make quite a compelling argument for the increase in precept, but as ever, the devil's in the detail. So, several questions here. Much of which has been already answered. Certainly, Joe posed one of the questions that I was. So, if we on page 44, item 223. It states that if option 2 is agreed, the precept increases beyond 26-27 are likely to be limited to £10 per annum. Yet, turning to page 37, item 1.11, it states the concern for pay and non-pay inflation being higher than the forecast in the last year's MTF, the financial plan. So I have fears about this contradiction in these projections, Tim, about being able to offer increases. Have you got the page number there, Tim? You're looking puzzled. Let's go again. Okay. If option 2 is agreed, you're stating here a precept increase beyond 26-27 are going to be limited to £10 per annum. Okay, got that. But likewise, in the following predecessor pages, at page 37, item 1.11 states concern for pay and non-pay inflation being higher than the forecast. There seems to be a bit of a contradiction there. Now, this is always in the financial plan, so I have concerns about how you formulated that. That's one question. The other question being, and you've mainly dealt with this, if this committee was to reject your budget proposals, where would the cuts take place? Would they be across the board, or would it be a major project? I'm sure you've done this exercise, so I'd be interested to know. That's another question. The last question being, should this committee agree the maximum increase, what can we expect from policing generally? In a nutshell, would we have more police officers? Would we have more projects? What would you do with the money? How do you intend to proceed further than it with this increased precept? And lastly, just as a final touch, not connected with the precept, but as this is a scrutiny and support committee, I'd like to mention I serve a ward of 8 villages, south and southwest of Bury St Edmunds. Police did used to attend parish council meetings on a regular basis. It hasn't happened for years until recently. Parish council meeting in the village of Durham, there were 2 police officers that attended, well briefed, well knowledged on what was happening in the area. Long may it continue. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so yeah, the predictions, they're always a forecast and they're always prone to variation. I'm not sure anyone would have predicted, for example, going back 2 or 3 years, inflation would have gone up to 11.2%. My personal view, the Bank of England was far too slow to react. The amount of money thrown at COVID, we can all look back in hindsight whether that was the right thing to do. I think it's highly debatable. But going forward, it's a really, really difficult thing to forecast. Nobody perhaps would have thought of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the spike in energy costs, for example, or the spike in food costs. That wasn't predictable, but that's the reality. So you have to look at it, and you can use the Bank of England forecast for what it's worth, which may not be a lot, I don't know. And I think it's fair to say, Colette could comment on that if you like, you look at an amalgamation of forecasts to come up with the figures there of what we think is going to happen in the future. The indications from government are that the £10 would be the maximum in the future. But of course, if they're not going to look at the funding formula and the consequences of the white paper, how on earth you predict anything like that, I've absolutely no idea. I will come back, Mike, to the point though, we've got to base the future on what we know, which is not a great deal, but we have to maintain that financial resilience of Suffolk Constabulary. We do not want to get into a muddle like, and I mean that, some other forces are in a very difficult position. And I think if there's one thing that collectively on this table we've achieved over the years is to have that financial stability, and I really don't think it's sensible to imperil that. So that's why the figures are used like that. I think on the point of view about what would happen, the cuts, well, we'd have to, it's a question of what would not be done. Now we've got more information, which I've given you earlier about hotspot policing, neighbourhood policing guarantee. And by the way, last year it wasn't 26 extra officers, it was 17 officers and 9 staff. There's a difference in financial points there, whatever anybody says, that's the reality. And it's a very difficult thing to say. So one of the things that you could do, and I'm not saying you would do that, is when people leave the organisation, I'm talking about staff, because we've got to keep the head numbers up, do you not replace staff? So there is a mechanism for that, and vacancies, but that's not really an efficient way to do it necessarily. But if needs must, that's what they have to do. Maybe you could cover it for a year with some reserves, yes, but that doesn't solve the thing longer term, because obviously once they're used, they're gone. So that's not a very good idea. I think on the point of engagement, the new policing model that we've spoken about before at this panel, going back to December 23, you've now got 80 community engagement officers all over the county, in the different policing, 50 different districts, of which yours is one. And I think that's the way to talk to your local engagement officer. They can go to parish council meetings if there's a specific need, but I don't think anybody believes that them turning up as a matter of routine is a good use of their time, bearing in mind everything else that's going on. But there's no reason why, I don't know, a brief bullet point report on occasional specific things, that is part of the system. So it depends on the circumstances. I've suggested many times that what would be helpful, and I've done it myself, if you could get a collection of parishes to have a meeting, where you get, I mean, I've done one, I think 6 or 7 parishes, it does help. I've offered to do that for any county council ward or wherever. Very happy to do that, because that can help. And normally you'll have a police officer come along, or they will give you a briefing note of the issues in the area. So there are ways of doing this, and there's no reason why that can be. In fact, I think we did liaise over doing that, but don't think it was much interest, was there? As it happens, I can't do much about that, but the offer's there. Okay, but thanks.
Did you just want to
Can I
come
just
back?
Chair? The improvements in policing with the increased precept, should it happen?
Well, we have heard quite a lot about what you're planning to do with the tech and releasing time. Is that, you know,
so
Rachel?
Visibility in towns, market towns, more in rural police. Couldn't say in every village you're going to get X or Y, no, because we do have to have a degree of flexibility, but that's what it will be. So definitely, that's in the papers there, loud and clear.
Thank you. I can see your hand waving, Councillor Beard, but you have already spoken quite a lot, and I've got Councillors Bennett, Councillor Smith-Lyte and Councillor Cook who haven't yet spoken, and they want to ask their questions, and then I'll possibly come back to you then. Councillor Bennett?
Chair, I have spoken. I'm quite happy to defer to Councillor Cook.
Councillor Cook?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? I was in, obviously, Commissioner, you set out a number of things that you weren't involved in the decision-making of, and you've set out a number of factors. You didn't just, that the budgets are being cut or not paid out. I strongly believe that we are all accountable for the decisions that we make and for the consequences that flow from those decisions, and I hope that you would agree with that. Would you agree that the decision to not increase the precept during your first term of office has had an ongoing cumulative impact on the budget available to the constabulary in this area, because that will have suppressed the level of income that the PCC took in those years, and that will have had a knock-on effect through every year that's followed thereafter, because our baseline will have been lower when it looks at the percentage of increase?
Yes, but the point is we were given no indication at the time that if you took that, there was a difference between 1 or 2%. I think the maximum you could have had was 2%. If you took the freeze grant, so you didn't freeze council, so you froze council tax, you got a 1% increase. So the difference then was 1%, but nobody said at the time, ever, that gap would not be increased in line with the rest of the council tax. We had big underspends. In fact, I think miraculously, the first one, if I remember correctly, bearing in mind the budget was a lot smaller, we were suddenly told, and there's now going to be an underspend of over £6 million on a budget of less than £120 million, okay? So that was part of it, and the same happened the next year. Subsequent years, it hasn't been like that, okay, because there's been a clear idea of any underspends of what they'd be used for, but that didn't happen in those 2 years, and we were given no indication from the Home Office, and I wasn't the only PCC that did that, that actually that money we got for the freeze grant wouldn't increase. So the short answer to your question is yes, it has made a difference. Yeah, of course I'm accountable for that, because I took the decision at the time. I'm very happy about that, because that's why I did it. But looking back, was that the right thing to do? Well, if we'd known now what we knew, so if we knew then what we know now, maybe the decision would have been different. But I can't answer that because I don't know.
And we can't go back in time either, really. But
Just a very brief observation. Obviously, we can't go back in time, and I wouldn't propose to do so. But the point remains that, as a consequence, our baseline has been lower as we progress through each of the years. But thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you for that, Adele. I've now got Councillor Smith-Lyte.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's quite brief, you'd be glad to know. Excuse my ignorance, perhaps, because I don't have a history with this panel as long as a lot of the members here, so hence why I'm asking this question. It's already been talked about the fact that, woefully, we only get half the budget from central government to cover everything. And I was just wondering how hard / have you lobbied the central government for extra funds? Thank you. Genuine question.
No, Rachel, no, thank you very much for that question. I don't know what else I could have done. I mean, I've had a real go at ministers. I couldn't care less what party they're in. This is about what's best for Suffolk. And I meant what I said. I am sick and tired of the obduracy, negativity, refusal to even listen and act for 13 years. I mean, it's not just for policing either, is it? You've only got to look at health, education, everything else. We are treated like a bunch of country peasants, and it's unacceptable. Really isn't good enough. I mean, I won't bang on for ages, but even if you look at infrastructure improvements, I mean, I think putting 45 billion quid up to the north of England for rail improvement, what about the Hawley Junction? That's been on there for ages. Not directly in my bailiwick, that's a good word, isn't it? But no, we mention it every possible time, and I have to say the Home Office seems to be deaf. No minister has done anything about it. But I can believe you me, whenever I have the opportunity, I do say that.
And I think those of us who have been on the panel for some time are aware of that. And I think in one of our previous meetings, we've agreed to back up the next lobbying letter that's going from Tim to government. We're going to do one in a similar vein. And it is an ongoing issue. And we all know that somebody did generate some new model for funding formula. It's got to be at least 3 years ago now, I think, and it's just been sat on. So there was a model there, and of course now even that's going to be out of date, especially with the new white paper. Who knows what's going to happen? But we'll still carry on pursuing it in the meantime. But thank you very much for that. Councillor Bennett, did you want to come back? And Councillor Beer, did you want to come back? And Simon. Councillor Beer?
Thank you. I'll be very quick. It was a clarification point on page 44, which I meant to ask much earlier. Both options 1 and 2 point out that there'd be a £10 each year thereafter. I'm going back to, I think it was the first year you introduced the £15, and I think it said on that, and I'm going from memory, I apologise if I haven't got it exactly right, that it would be £6 thereafter. We never did have a £6 increase, I think it went to 10. So how can you guarantee that these £10 year after will actually happen? I can't see that you can make that statement, personally.
Well, I can't guarantee it, absolutely right, but we have to... but we have to put a projection going forward based on what we're told. That's what we legally have to do. And frankly, I'll say it like this, most of these things we're told are a load of old hogwash because, well, they're just not accurate, but we have to use something. But that's happened for years. And I don't know what else you can do, but I don't know, Colette, if you want to, I mean, unless you have some pearls of wisdom, I'm sure you have, that I haven't got.
Just to add that, yeah, the precept limit for future years has not been announced, so we don't know what the precept limit will be in future years. We took on board feedback from the Policing Crime Panel last year in terms of kind of the we pointed out kind of that the precept's forecast in future years was lower than it had been in reality in the past, and we've assessed that, and we think, yes, it has been. In recent years, the precept has been much higher than the kind of 2% we had forecast into the future years of the MTFP previously. We've made the judgment kind of based on £10 here of future years because it provides a good balance from what was earmarked in the spending review in June of this year for the police spending review, but it's an assumption. We've got a list of the assumptions at the front of the MTFP. We've got the impacts, the assumptions, should they kind of be a percentage out either way. The precept is one of those.
Thank you. That's their assumptions, but it's very misleading because
But,
that can't be held
but
to.
they have acted on what we said last year because it's bigger than it was last time. So we're heading in the right direction. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few final observations. The income inequality question, I do want to clear that up. It is a recent development in this country that the working age income is now lower than retired people's income. That is a new development, and I think we all need to be aware of that. And connected to that, I mentioned East Suffolk Council. I've just checked. This was a survey that was done. It got over 2,000 responses, actually, but over a longer period on council tax, how we should close the gap, suggestions. It's very detailed, and I'm trying to find out to what level that could be shared. Might be of interest to you. I was just looking at the results there, and just interestingly, in the options that were given to respondents, a few people, a sizable minority, were in favour of going above the 3% maximum that you have to have before a referendum. And it was the willingness to do that was directly proportionate to age. So the older you got, the more willing you were to go above the 3%. So that might be that they feel more perception of whatever reason. So when you get a survey where you're predominantly getting responses from the older age group saying, yeah, okay, we would be supportive of a higher level, you've got to be wary of that. And I fully support Franstine's comments about impact on more marginalised groups, etc. But on the whole, I have been quite prickly in the past, I think, and I'm actually quite, I sense a greater responsiveness from yourselves. I'm very, very happy to see Chief Constable here, Chief Executive, the whole team here. I do sense a greater responsiveness, and I'm impressed with the new website. I was looking at that this morning. It's got a lot of up-to-date stuff on there. It looks good. Similar to Councillor Chester, I have noticed greater visibility and responsiveness in my local area in Felixstowe with a new setup there with Inspector Clack. So overall, I'm quite pleased, and I do feel that you're responding to our questions and suggestions in a genuine way. So thank you, and I am minded to support your option 2.
Thank you very much for that, Seamus.
Well, thank you, Seamus. I do want to make it quite clear. You might think I'm mad saying this. I do actually enjoy the panels because that is the whole point of having call it cut and thrust, whatever you like. You're there elected, like I am, to represent people and so on. And the views are important. And I think, unlike some panels, we have always had a good, constructive, candid relationship. I think that's the best way to put it. But there's no point in having just either yes or niet or people dividing on political lines or anything like that, because I think genuinely everybody does what they think is best for Suffolk, and I think that's really crucial. So thank you for those words, but I'd also like to thank you as well.
Thank you. Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably not as positive then. Personally, I want to thank Franstine for raising the issue around the public service ecology duty. I've not been convinced that the OPCC have played due regard to that. From what's said, unless other evidence can come to light, you need to have due regard to the equality impact. That doesn't necessarily have to be a written one, but you need to provide evidence that you've taken that. And the results of a consultation are not due regard. So I think I would like to see, before I could support this, that evidence is provided. That's not saying I'm going to veto it, but I might abstain from the vote because I do not feel I've seen the evidence and the answer was provided to Franstine's question. You need to make sure that there is no adverse direct effect on those 9 protected groups. And I don't believe your report is just a tick box saying, yes, you've done it, but there is no evidence being provided today to say that has been done. Therefore, I would like to see that evidence before and maybe you can provide that, I don't know. I just need to see that.
I presume that's something we can put forward as a recommendation, is it? that we'd like to see that done.
Madam Chair, I don't believe that the budget has, it's not played due regard to,
No.
to a legal act.
But can it be done subsequently or not? I'm not sure what the legal implications are.
I think I'll get Darren to answer that. But what I did say earlier, if we can find ways to improve on that, definitely make sure we do that for next year. And I
accept that, but you have due regard to pay that now. That needs to be completed
all right, Darren,
for this
you can
budget.
answer that then. But I
mean, I accept that, Tim. That next year
I speak to lots of people all over the place all the time from all groups. That's always part of the thing. I'm not saying it's formalised, but if you want a formal answer to that, well, Darren.
Yeah, happy to give an answer to that. So obviously we have the survey. Tim referenced the engagement we do with lots of different groups. The fact that we engage with those different groups over the survey, we do a lot of work to try to reach out to those groups. I do accept the point that those conversations happen in an informal setting. Leading up to this, we have conversations, I would say probably almost on a daily basis about what is with the constabulary around, what is being proposed, what impact does it have, how does that work through into all of our different communities. I recognise that probably hasn't been formalised in the same way, and I would take that learning on board. I'm confident that we've had those discussions in a verbal way, that we've reached out, we've got different views, we've looked at how the ONS data compares to what we're hearing in the survey, and also we have a wider discussion through our APP process about how we work through to ensure that the constabulary is representative, how we work with our Police Race Action Plan committee, how we work with ISCRI. So the bit around equality and diversity, I would say, is embedded in the work that we do really generally. The equality impact assessment, I actually would take that learning in terms of having a formal documented impact assessment in future. I think that's a good point. I would challenge the accusation that we haven't taken it into account for this decision.
Thank you. I'm not saying you haven't taken it into account, I'm saying I've seen no evidence. And I think the things you've just provided still don't provide me with the evidence. What you're basically saying is, the point there, you said you've engaged with the constabulary, but the constabulary is not representative of those groups. It's directly sitting about the budget and the policy changes with those groups. Policy changes come later, but around the budget with those groups. You say you've had ongoing dialogue. Can you provide the evidence where you've said, okay, what is the impact of you having to pay X amount extra? Because the survey doesn't ask that. The survey just says, are you going to pay, or would you agree with it? So I don't see the evidence that you've engaged and looked at the adverse or positive effect, I'm saying that just to be fair, on those 9 characteristics. And I don't think the evidence is there. So that's why I'm saying I don't think I can support today either way. I don't think I can vote either way, because that is really, for me, that due regard to not being paid.
So just to come back on a bit of that, I think the due regard we would need to pay isn't just on the fact of the decision report that's in front of you. It's not just about the precept decision and that binary financial impact on the communities. It's about what the operational impact that the operational delivery that the police can have on the back of the financial decisions that we're making. So when I was talking about the impact and the conversations we're having with the constabulary, that was very much about how they serve the communities and all of the communities, the reassurance we seek through members of Tim's team being on the PRAP to ensure that the money that we provide to the constabulary to deliver the service is being used well, the feedback we get from ISCRI to ensure that that all works. I don't think we can take the assessment of this decision in a very binary, what is the financial impact of that? Although I would accept that's part of it, I think it's a much wider piece in terms of actually how is the constabulary, through the funding we provided, deploying and serving the wider communities we face. I would strongly argue that in the 11 months I've been here, I've been actually really, really impressed with the amount of engagement that as an office and Tim individually does throughout the communities, the structures we have in place. I would accept the point that we may need to formalise that and document it, especially for decisions like this, and I'll take that on board. But I would challenge the fact that we don't engage, listen, and have conversations about that wider impact of policing on all of our communities. And actually, I would say in certain strands of that work, in terms of the police race action plan and the work that we do in terms of ISCRI, that is well documented in terms of what we're trying to do as an office with the budget that we have and the impact that we're trying to have through those groups.
Thank you.
I don't want to continue. I think I've made my point. I could kick back against the police race action plan because we've not seen any evidence, and we've asked for that to come to this committee, so this panel. So, yeah, I think we are where we are. But I just want to raise my concerns.
And I understand where you're coming from, where you're both coming from, and it is important, and I'm not trying to brush it under the carpet. One thing I've always said, in this position, you are genuinely there to represent all people in Suffolk, and I don't mind who or where they come from. I should think if you looked at the various visits and engagements we do, it does cover a huge range, more than we could, I don't know how much more you could fit in. That's really important. I accept the point about whether it's documented per se specifically for this. And that evidence, I mean, I get all sorts of people talk to me about things from all different backgrounds, and that's always been the case, and that's really, really important. And that does help shape what we're doing. Indeed, it is a fundamental part of our police and crime plan, which is the top document that we have. But we're more than happy to look at that. I can't sit here now and say, well, exactly what happened, but with your help and support, well, then we'll see what we can do for that for next year. It's how we can do it so your needs are satisfied as well. And I can't be more open and honest about it than that. I get where you're coming from. Yes, I did say earlier that's an area, yes, we can improve it. And in various other things, the panel suggested we've taken it on board and delivered it accordingly. Happy to do it again going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. I think, Franstine, you wanted to come back.
I just wanted to finish off to say the reason I asked the question is that I'm really concerned that part of the considerations with regards to the precept, such a small number respond. And my concern is that where there's an opportunity for those protected groups to have a say, and they don't realise that the service that they're paying for, they could have had a say, and they chose not to because they're just not aware. And it's just looking at the bigger picture of, I think it's going to have more of an impact on those people, along with all the other councils putting up their precepts. To them, 15p, 22p a week, meh. £15 a year, meh. But when you look at the bigger picture, £2,000 plus with everybody else, and those groups that don't choose to get involved, I think maybe have a longer consultation period, maybe do more social media, different ways, but I'm just concerned that the decision rests with the comments from 1,200 people.
Thanks for that, Franstine, and I do agree with that. The problem with the longer consultation, we didn't get the details very late. In fact, we've even had to produce the budget without all the details, as I've explained earlier. So, yeah.
To a longer, just the one question, that could feed into a bigger consultation when you do get the information.
What has been agreed recently is a major survey through public sector leaders that I think is going to start in next year sometime, yeah, which will be a comprehensive, financed by the Pool Business Rates Fund, to actually look at in depth of so many areas like that. I haven't got all the details yet. It's being drafted at the moment, but very happy to share that with you if you'd like to do that. But I mean, you should get it, perhaps not yourself, Franstine or Simon, but through your council leaders. They should know all about this and be able to share it with you, because we want to make sure that's right. I think it's going to be the biggest survey that's been done. Again, is about joining together to look at all these socio-economic, demographic issues and so on, how we can move forward. But if you put that down as an action, we'll let you know.
That was to let the panel have sight of the. Just to make sure we've got what you're agreeing to. You're going to let us have sight of this questionnaire that's going out through all the districts and boroughs and public sector leaders.
briefly some detail on that?
Absolutely. So in essence, we've got the funding through public sector leaders, so through the councils, to procure a specialist provider to provide a 2-year quantitative, statistically valid, so a confidence interval of below 5% assessment of community safety across the county. So that'll be broken down to district level, but also it will take into account different demographic groups and different protected characteristics. So that is being developed through the Safer Stronger Communities Board. We're out for procurement at the moment. Procurement closes at the end of this week. We'll have the provider chosen in the next month or so, and it'll be in field by the middle of May. So that will draw about between 5,000 and 7,000. That will include about 5,000 to 7,000 people across Suffolk. But part of the methodology that we've asked for is targeted activity to ensure that we do get a representative model. So we've seen that used elsewhere in the country, and it's been quite effective at delivering changes in how a range of services make operational decisions on the ground by having that better data and that better quality data in the local community. So very, very happy to share that. SODA's been heavily involved. That will have a documented impact assessment on it. And I'm very happy to share where we're going with that. And as we develop the question set, we'll be engaging with all the councils. And very happy to provide any additional information as we progress.
Thank you. Right, I think we've all had quite a lot of questions, and I think a lot of you have also made some comments, as part of the discussion. So I think, unless anyone has got anything that they really still wish to make either a comment or another question or a summary, I think we're going to move on to the vote. Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I just make a reflection? I think it's been a very intense period of debate, and we've had some very frank answers from the panel opposite. If I reflect that against my division down in South Suffolk, if you ask anybody, would you like to have a cost of A or a cost of A times 1.5, in other words, 15% or 10% above it, as a general comment, people would want to go for the lower price. But as far as their opinion of what our police force is doing and the comfort that gives them, when you challenge and probe, you find that actually their police force is so valuable to them, if it has to cost more, they will tick that box. I just wanted to share that with you because I think...
Thank you for that. So I'm going to suggest that we now move on to the vote. Please note that if we wish to veto the PCC's proposed precept, we require 2/3 of the panel's total membership of 9 members to vote against the proposal. A decision to veto the proposed precept can only be for the reason that it is considered either to be too high or too low, although reasons and recommendations may be included in the panel's report to the PCC, whether or not the precept is vetoed. Now, unfortunately, Councillor Cook and Franstine were not in the chamber for the whole of the debate, which means that they are now unable to vote. So how many does that mean we've still got left? So we've still got 10 people who can vote. And Adriana is now going to ask each panel member in turn to switch on their microphones and clearly state whether they are for the precept proposal, against the precept proposal, or abstain. This has to be a recorded vote. So if you are voting against the proposal, you must state whether this is because the proposed precept...
Chair, sorry, point of order. Sorry. Please forgive me for interrupting. I'm a little bit confused because the recommendations, are we not... There's 3 choices that we can make other than just supporting the proposal. Support the precept without qualification or comment. Support the precept with recommendations. and we haven't really debated the recommendations yet. So I'm just nervous going straight into a vote without actually considering.
I think we usually do the recommendations after we've done the vote. We will then have if we decide not to veto, we will then agree what recommendations we are going to put forward. Is that okay?
Yeah, you have. You've made 3 or 4 recommendations during the debate and the discussion, and whether you support or don't support, the chances are that they're going to be the same sort of recommendations, but there will be space at the end to add more if you need to.
Is that okay? Sorry. Right, so, so if you are going to vote against the proposal, you must state whether this is because the proposed precept is too high or too low. And then, as I said, once we've gone through the vote, we will then make some recommendations, and hopefully Adriana has got a few of them written down, and we will go through those and agree those, and then hopefully we'll have a comfort break.
Okay, so we'll start with Councillor Peter Beer.
Yes, I wish to veto the proposal. You've heard my views earlier, but because it's too high. Thank you.
Councillor Seamus Bennett.
I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Chester.
Support.
Councillor Stephen Connelly. Councillor James Finch. Simon Furlong. I did, thank you. You supported, yes, thank you. Mr. Furlong.
I'm going to abstain for the reasons I stated earlier.
Okay. Councillor Sarah Mansel.
I'll vote for.
Councillor Joe Mason.
For.
Councillor David Smith.
On balance, for.
And Councillor Rachel Smith-Lyte.
For.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 for the proposal, 1 against, and 1 abstention.
So that we have a majority of support. So we now need to make any further comments or recommendations to the PCC for his consideration, and that will be included in our report that goes to the PCC. Do you want to just summarise what we've got, so what Adriana has already taken down from the discussion and questions that we've had already, and then we can take away from those or we can add to those.
Obviously, I may not have picked up everything that members want to put forward. So the last one was the one that we've just had a discussion on with Darren about the it's on another page. The large consultation that's going to be that's being procured is going to keep the panel informed on the progress with that. You've asked the PCC to come back in October with an update on the investment in technology that he's planned under option 2 and the expected impact of that on freeing up officer time. You've asked him again to consider how reserves might be used for invest to save projects, and he'll also report back in October on that. We do tend to have a 6-monthly financial update at our October meeting. We also talked about whether the panel might want to have a workshop with a more extensive analysis of the PCC's reserves, what they are for and when they are due to be spent and what on. I think that actually came from your side. Yeah. Simon's mentioned that before. And then a note to the PCC that for future budget papers, the panel would like to see a formal equality impact assessment evidencing how you've looked at the potential effect of the raise on the 9 protected characteristics.
Simon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just add to that around the equality? Is it possible that you'll be able to come back, bearing in mind the budget has now been supported by this panel? Would you be able to come back and just provide the evidence on this one? You know, some of the stuff that you've carried out. I think, you know, whilst I abstained, it'd be useful to see that. I just didn't feel like a vote at this point, but now that it's gone forward, I think it would be useful to see, you know, how you've done that.
So can we add to that, like we have a retrospective evidence evidence report on the impact assessment of this budget. And yes, I was going to say, can we add the, I mean, I think we had an offer, it was from Colette, to do a workshop on reserves, and I think that would certainly be worth adding to that one about reserves. So does that mean can we link that in with the other one about reserves? Yes. Councillor Bennett.
So I just want to be sure we've captured the idea of reaching out, finding a wider and more representative group of the population. And I refer I think not only to protected characteristics, but ages and income levels. Have we captured that? I'm just not quite clear. That would be for me a recommendation.
To be part of this wider questionnaire that's going out by the Safer, Stronger Communities, will that go into that sort of depth?
And say we're going to do X, Y, and Z now, but let us consider, we will find a way to do it, yeah. Okay? And that's not trying to pass the buck. Just let's give us some thought how we could do that. And we will do something, and then we'll ask you to liaise with us to make sure it's what you want. Okay? I think we can be fair in that.
Have we got that written down? And I think, Councillor Mason?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier in the meeting some work regarding doing a joint letter to government, and I just wondered whether there was some way that we can maybe reference that within our recommendations. You know, the successive governments and challenges in Suffolk regarding funding generally. I just wonder whether this is also a good opportunity to reference the fact that a joint letter or piece of work needs to be done to communicate our frustrations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Have we got any further recommendations? Councillor Finch?
Sorry, just to clarify what we've just heard, you're saying that that letter will come from this panel, not from the PCC, from this panel.
In a previous meeting, we agreed as a panel to write our own letter, but we were waiting so that it sort of landed on the minister's desk with, you know, within a day of Tim's letter, so that it was like a concerted effort from both the PCC side and from our side together. But if we want to add more detail into that letter, which I think is what we're proposing now, is that right?
I think what members are saying is that perhaps we would do a joint letter instead, but that would be whether the PCC would agree to that, or whether we'd be stronger together or separate.
I think it'll have more effect doing two, but we liaise with you so you get the right message. And the reason we haven't done that yet is because it literally, well, we've only just got the final details of what money we're going to have next year on Monday or Tuesday. So I couldn't have done it beforehand. And I did not expect, I know we've finished the debate, to be told we were not having the hotspot policing taken away.
I think that recommendation is already in hand because we agreed it at a previous meeting, and we are waiting for you to see your words of your letter and make sure that ours is sending it to the same sort of message. Are we happy with those? What we've got about 5 or 6 recommendations now. And we will put those into a formal report. Councillor Finch?
If we wanted to strengthen that, is there any way we can actually get that strengthened by a similar letter from Suffolk leaders?
Again,
can we make a recommendation to them?
We can try and contact the leaders of our councils ourselves,
or give them a proposed
and
letter.
say that we're writing this letter. Would you like to support it?
Yes, of course, and also the PCC obviously works with all the leaders quite extensively himself.
Right, are we? So we now have to agree to make in a formal report on behalf of the panel on the PCC's precept, and we have to do that by the statutory deadline of the 8th of February. And that will include all of these recommendations.
Yeah.
I will ask, can we have just general affirmation that we are happy for the chair to provide the formal report on behalf of the panel, and it will include all of those recommendations that we've just been discussing. Councillor Finch? Just anyone not disagree with that or want to add anything else? Right, thank you for that. I'm now going to adjourn for 10 minutes because I think we all need a comfort break. So can we come back here at 12:20 to do the rest of the business of the meeting? welcome back. We now have a couple of other items on our agenda. So we will now move to agenda item 6, which is the recent decisions of the Police and Crime Commissioner. This paper summarises the decisions taken by the PCC since our October 2025 meeting up to the publication of this agenda. Some initial key lines of inquiry have been set out at the top of page 92 of the agenda pack, which was suggested at the panel's informal workshop on the 23rd of December 2025. So we will go through those two items, which I think were raised by Franstine and Simon, I think. So maybe they would like to ask the questions to the PCC concerning those points. Which of you wanted to go first? Was it Franstine? Oh yeah, that's right. I couldn't remember who's led on from whose. Simon.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It was relating to a specific decision, but I think there's a more generalised point as well. Sorry, apologies, I'm just going to have to bring up the which decision it was. Number 38, 2025, which was around the renewal of Section 22A collaboration agreement for the Joint Professional Standards Department. I kind of went through the decisions, and having looked at it, I couldn't see the rationale and the benefits that had been accrued by the delivery of this joint professional standards. The information in the document which we had just purely set out when it had been set up, how it had been set up, and that actually more money was going to go into it and then an increased size of structure. I suppose what I would expected to have seen was actually this is what it's delivered, and these were the outcomes and the improvements that a joint performance monitoring department had made, whereas it just seemed to talk about financial implications and structure. So I just was unclear as to how the decision was made to increase this for another 5 years when we had no, or if that's what the PCC was given, on what basis, because I couldn't see anything in my reading of it that actually showed what outcome it was achieved.
So, Professional Standards Department, I think, has not had the resource it should have done. That's down to Chief Constables. Two of them, don't forget it's a joint one with Norfolk. I think it was established before I even started. I think it started in 2010 or 11, something like that. And I think the concern I've had, which we've done at accountability performance panels and we do at weekly conferences, is taking too long to deal with complaints. I'm then told there's not enough capacity to do that, which is why the investment has gone in. And I think the answer here is it jolly well needs to mark up its performance. So we will be keeping a very close eye on that, because if you're going to put extra investment, it needs to work, and it needs to be objective, as I say, much quicker, and come to conclusions. And I think there are issues about keeping people informed with the progress of investigations. We do dip sampling separately to look at the quality of the complaints as opposed to whether it was necessarily done. Well, the quality does include timeliness, but to make sure they get the right result. And I think it's a really important department. So people who do make a range of complaints, their needs are satisfied. And there will probably be people in this room who know of instances where it hasn't been done as well as it should have been. That then links in with the IOPC, the Office for Independent Office of Police Conduct. And bearing in mind the national situation regarding trust and confidence, it's absolutely crucial that this department ups its game. I can't give a guarantee, but what I can give you a guarantee about, we will be holding the constabulary through the Chief Constable to pretty vigorous account, because it's got to be done better. And one of the problems you've always got with police professional standards, you will always hear it's the police marking their own homework, which is why we need to do separate assessments of some. We don't do all of them. But if people have an issue, I've always said this to everybody, if you have an issue that you've felt something hasn't been dealt with properly, or you know someone or one of your constituents, write to us directly and we will follow it up, guaranteed. And if things haven't been done properly, we will want to know why and what's going to be done about it. So I can't say any more than that at the moment, but I think, again, that is something you might want to look at well, we could see how progress is going, but if you want a particular reference, I think you need to give it 6 or 7 months to bed down and see how it's going. Don't hold me to that exactly. We'll need to, but sometime in the next year, after a reasonable period of time, we can come back to you on that one.
Thank you for that. I think that would be really useful to see that. I suppose my question would then be, is there a break clause in having it as a joint? Yes. Because if it's not working efficiently or effectively, then we need to know that. And I'm just, I suppose there was nothing in the report that gave me the rationale why you wanted to continue with the collaboration. If it's not, you know, as you said yourself, it's been going since 2010. Is it really working effectively for the Constabulary and Suffolk? I'm not too worried about Norfolk, but I suppose it's a joint programme.
So all of these, unless otherwise specified, I think I'm right, they have a 12-month, they have a break clause, you can give 12 months notice. Yeah. Norfolk have done that on 1 or 2 occasions, as it happens, so that is always there. And actually, yes, that's the backstop, but if you want to stop doing something, I think a sensible negotiation about how to either part the ways, and for that matter, all bring things together, is how it needs to proceed. So that is a backstop, that's a guarantee. If it doesn't work, it can be disbanded.
Thank you for that. And for the rationale of the decision to continue it, you obviously can see there can be improvements, but I just...
well, it's because it's worked okay so far, and I think the gauntlet to be thrown down here is, with that extra investment and extra staff, we need to see the results. So, as I said earlier, Simon, it does need improvement. I think the time taken to deal with some complaints and the communication to the people involved needs to be improved. So that's what we're on about. So they've got a chance to do that, and they need to deliver.
Thank you for that. Can I just, Madam Chair, ask for a recommendation to be put in around about the rationale for the decision to be included in the decision papers as well? Because it wasn't clear to me.
Thank you.
I'm happy with it.
I think what
I'm thinking about future.
I think what Simon is saying is as a recommendation, we want to ask for some sort of rationale about decisions.
I think on all of these long-running Section 22A collaboration agreement, it's always quite hard to prove the counterfactual, isn't it? You know, because it's been going for so long. So as Tim said, we have a really close relationship with PSD. We meet with them regularly for APP. We are reassured, and there's significant additional information that comes to us outside of the decision report. Having said all of that, I share the reflection on this one was also, I came to the same point sort of independently in terms of the documentation. So we have agreed with the team that oversee the renewal of our Section 22s to go for a slightly different process as these come up in future. So that will be more of a full review of the Section 22, which will include actually an equality impact assessment on each Section 22. So we will get more of that information in the decision report when it comes to us. So this was the one that triggered, with conversations with Tim, the request to go and talk to them about just strengthening that process. So it's an evolution, but it's definitely something we've not just us actually. I think now long-term collaboration do struggle from that evidencing the counterfactual sometimes.
Thank you. That will. I think that's fine, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Franstine.
Yes, my question is referring back to Decision 19, 2025, Complaints and Conduct Policy. I would like to know, well, first of all, I'll just give you a little bit of context as to why I'm asking this question. It's with regards to complaints that have been upheld by the IOPC and how effective professional standards, Suffolk professional standards are with regards to dealing with those recommendations from complaints that have been upheld. My experience, it's now 4 years, and the IOPC made some recommendations in favour of my complaint. I am a survivor of domestic abuse and domestic violence, and justice was not served because of how it was handled, and that's why the complaint was made. The IOPC upheld the complaint in part and made some recommendations. In July July 2025, a letter was sent to professional standards to ask if those recommendations had been implemented, and to date, professional standards and your office and the Chief Constable, who you were all sent the letter to, have not replied. So my question is, if you're going to fund the joint professional standards, and with regards to the complaints and conduct policy, I know that my recommendations haven't been implemented, and it's been 4 years now. I understand that if you were to do an impact assessment, you may find that race complaints that are upheld by the IOPC, the recommendations are not implemented. So I would ask the PCC, with regards to waiting to see how efficient the joint service is working over the next 12 months, if you would take a look at those areas of working for the professional standards.
Absolutely, Franstine would do that, and I am disturbed to hear if there are cases that have been, well, having a protracted investigation or follow-up, or the recommendations. If you've got specific details, very happy to look at that. Absolutely, we'll have obviously take that afterwards, not discuss it in public. But that's a very important point. There's no point in having a professional standards department investigating complaints, and then if through various mechanisms recommendations are made, we need to know that they are put in place. That, of course, is one area where you would say there's an operational divide, but as a PCC or OPCC, we are there to represent all people, and therefore we have to be supplied with any information that we require for us to fulfil our obligations, so we will definitely follow that up. Yeah, I won't go into details, but yeah, and I do say that to every member on this panel, please tell people, if you've got a complaint and you're not satisfied, if we don't hear about it, I can't do anything about it. Do let us know, and if you're not satisfied with the follow-up you get, even if it's from us, well then remind us, because that's what we're there to do. And people deserve answers. And I would just add very quickly, they are supposed to apply, the constabulary, the Victims' Code of Practice in all situations. I don't see any excuse for that never being done. It's been there on the statute book for some years, and it needs to be done properly. So we can look at all of that, and very happy to take that forward.
Okay, thank you.
Problem.
If you will.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments on the recent decisions of the Police and Crime Commissioner? We've got a recommendation, I think. Do you want to just summarise what the recommendation is?
Sorry. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my notes. Yes, that in future section 22 renewals, there's going to be more background data in the papers to evidence why the renewal is required. I don't know if were we also going to ask for some more information on this particular one, or is that going to be seen?
I think there was an agreement with the Commissioner that we'd look at it in 6 months' time, just to have a look at, because the break clause being 12 months, okay. Come back and make sure it was. Thank you.
Work programme is discussed at our next agenda item. Are there any comments members wish to make on the information panel? Information bulletin, sorry. And I think it includes the dates for your diary, which after the last meeting we have put forward a series of dates for our workshops, so you've got them all in the calendar. Which I think is quite helpful. Any further comments on the information bulletin? Thank you. And then finally we move to the forward work programme at agenda item 8, where we have agenda items planned for the next scheduled meetings of the panel are set out on the paper. But just remember, this is a live document to enable a panel to be responsive to changing circumstances. And I think we are going to, is there going to be a slight amendment to anything? Because we have got the, you know, we've got the white paper as well, which is quite difficult to get your head around.
Yeah, obviously at some point members will be wanting a briefing on the implications of the white paper, but we're not quite ready with that yet.
Councillor Beer?
Can I just be confirmed? It is in March you're going to give a further update about the Sudbury police station. That's on there, that's what I thought. Could I just ask, have you looked into the possibility of the site near the fire station, which was the car park of old Fanner's Silk Mills, which is across the road opposite? It's still, I believe, it was before Christmas, still available for sale. Yeah, but will they be looking at that? Yes. Because I don't want you to miss out or come back so you didn't tell me in time.
Yeah, that will be looked at, yeah.
Just for clarity, are we saying now that we don't need a meeting on the 20th of February?
We won't need the meeting on February the 20th because we haven't vetoed the precept proposal. So our next meeting will be on the 20th of March. If there's no further comments, thank you very much for your time this morning. I think we've had a very interesting debate, and I think we have asked the PCC lots of questions about the process and the precept. So that will now conclude today's Police and Crime Panel meeting. The next meeting of the panel will be at 9:30 a.m. on Friday the 20th of March, and we are hoping to review the PCC's commissioning of services and outcome monitoring. So I'll now officially close the meeting at 12:40. Do you want to come back?
Just to say thank you very much for your support and a very vigorous debate. I think that's the most vigorous one I've had that's the 14th one I've done, but no, that's fine, that's what it is about. So no, I do thank you for your support. Even you, Peter, how about that?
So I now officially close the meeting at 12:41. Thank you very much.